Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 5 scariest nights people survived inside haunted U.S. graveyards, we return to the quiet edges of the world, where the fences rust, the headstones lean, and the living don't linger after dark. These aren't just legends. These are the nights real people walked into graveyards and came back with stories they wish they could forget. Every account you're about to hear is real, taken from those who stood between the stones, felt the ground breathing under their feet, and knew with absolute certainty that they were not alone. My goal this month is to reach 4,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers wander in, listen, and vanish into the dark without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there's a graveyard in your town that truly unsettles you, one you avoid after sunset, type its name below. Because when the world sleeps and the soil settles around the dead, some of them do not rest. Kill the lights, silence the world. Take a slow breath and let us begin. My name is Caleb, and I'm from Herman, Missouri. I always feel like I should start with that, like I'm leaving a voicemail for somebody who doesn't have my number saved. I'm not anybody special. I'm 33. I work as an insurance adjuster, and my life's been pretty much paperwork, coffee, and trying not to forget people's birthdays. If you know Herman at all, you probably think of wineries and old brick buildings and tourists on the weekends. That's pretty much it. It's a small town with too many churches and not enough parking in October. A few years back, my cousin moved here for a job at the factory out on the edge of town, and we ended up renting this old 2-story house together. It's on a quiet street up the hill, away from the main drag. The kind of place where the mail still gets walked up to the porch, not just shoved in a box by the curb. He's technically my cousin who moved for a job, but we grew up seeing each other every summer, so it just felt like slipping back into old habits. His name's Mark. He does rotating shifts, so sometimes he's on days, sometimes nights. The only thing that really stood out about the house at the start was what was across the road. Directly opposite our place, like someone lined them up on purpose, was this modest old cemetery. Nothing huge, not like those big sprawling ones you see in cities. Just a small 1870s hillside graveyard, maybe a block long if that. It had a black iron fence around it, with spear-top bars and a decorative gate right across from our front walk. Near the front, it was neat and trimmed, like the town maintenance crew still cared. But if you looked past the first few rows, the grass got higher and a little wild. The stones tilted at weird angles back there, and thistles grew up around some of them. From our front porch, you could see pretty much the whole place. There were some family plots with the same last names carved into 4 or 5 stones in a cluster, all similar shapes, that always looked kind of sweet to me, like they'd made sure to stay together. And then there was one grave set apart from all the others, tucked closer to the far corner by a big maple tree, like it had been put down and everyone else just decided to keep some distance. From the house, you couldn't read the name on it, just see the shape of the stone and the way the ground dipped a little in front of it. At first, it just felt peaceful. I know that sounds odd. A lot of people get creeped out living by cemeteries, but honestly, it was quiet. No parties, no loud neighbors, no headlights sweeping your walls at 2 a.m. Just trees, stones, and whoever came by to visit on Sundays after church. On warm evenings, I'd sit on the porch with a beer after dinner. You'd hear crickets, the occasional dog barking down the hill, sometimes a distant train horn if the wind carried it right. The iron gate would squeak when someone went in or out. That was about it. My job is half in office, half from home. I go through claims, look at photos, call people after hailstorms or fender benders, and ask them a bunch of questions they're too stressed to answer clearly. It's not exciting, but it pays the rent. On the days I worked from home, I'd set up my laptop at the dining room table. Because it faces the front window, I'd look up between emails and see the cemetery across the street, just sitting there like an old neighbor dozing in a chair. If the wind was up, I'd see it ripple through the maple trees and hear the iron fence rattle a little. Once in a while, someone would come by to put flowers on a grave, and I'd watch them for a minute before going back to numbers. Mark didn't care much about it at first either. If anything, he liked it. "Cheapest neighbors we'll ever have," he said one of the first nights, standing next to me on the porch. No loud music, no complaints about my truck. He laughed and clanged his beer bottle against mine. Life just sort of settled into a pattern. He'd leave at weird hours depending on his shift. I'd get up around 7, make coffee, listen to the radiator knock itself awake in the winter. The screen door on the front porch had this little metal latch that never quite lined up right, so it made a soft scraping sound when you opened it. The wood in the house would pop sometimes as it settled, which I got used to. All old houses talk like that. The cemetery was just part of the backdrop. You know how you can live next to something strange, and after a while, your brain files it under normal. That's how it was, until it wasn't. The first odd thing was small enough that I almost didn't remember it later. It was a Tuesday, I think. Early fall. The air had that cool bite in the mornings, but it still warmed up by noon. I was working from home, and I got up to refill my coffee. As I walked back through the dining room, I saw movement out the front window. The iron gate to the cemetery was swinging open, slow and steady, like someone had just walked through it, except there was nobody there. I stood there with my mug in my hand, watching the gate creak wider. It wasn't windy. The trees were barely moving. A couple of leaves skittered across the street, but that was all. The gate opened maybe halfway, rocked on its hinges a couple times like it was thinking about something, and then settled. It's a loose hinge, I told myself. Doesn't take much. Maybe a truck drove by a minute ago, and I just missed it. Vibrations, whatever. I went back to work. That weekend, I noticed that someone had put fresh flowers on one of the older graves. Not the ones near the road, where people usually stopped, but one of the stones a little further back. Tall, white flowers, like lilies. I'd lived there long enough by then to have kind of a mental map of who visited which spots. That stone never had anyone. The name was worn almost smooth. I couldn't even read the dates. I pointed it out to Mark that evening when we were heading to his truck. "Did you see that? Somebody finally remembered that one." He squinted. "Huh, guess somebody's doing a late Mother's Day or something." We didn't think much more about it. People put flowers on graves. It's not exactly breaking news. The second time I really noticed something, it was about the motion light. We'd installed one on the porch because the existing fixture barely did anything. The kind that kicks on when it senses movement. It worked fine for a while. A car goes by, it flashes. You open the door, it comes on. Normal. Then, every so often, it started snapping on in the middle of the night. Not blinking or flickering, just on, like someone walked right up to our porch. The first time, I woke up because the light leaked through the curtains and hit my eyelids. I rolled over, checked my phone. It was 3:07 a.m. I lay there, listening. The house was quiet. No footsteps, no cars, not even a distant dog. After a minute, the light clicked back off. Raccoon, I thought. Cat, possum. We get all kinds of critters out here. In the morning, I looked at the porch out of habit. No knocked over trash, no scratch marks on the door, nothing. Just the screen door swaying a little, making that soft old creak. Small stuff like that kept happening. The cemetery gate would be closed when I went to bed and cracked open when I left for work. I'd hear the faint clink of the iron latch in the evening, even when no one was around. The motion light would flare on for 30 seconds around 3 in the morning, give or take 10 minutes either way, and then click off. I kept giving myself reasons. Old hardware settles, lights malfunction, animals move around when people are sleeping. I told myself it only seemed like it always happened at the same time, because I only remembered the weird ones. It was Mark who started taking it a little more seriously. One night, he was on the late shift, so he didn't get home until about 1:30. I'd fallen asleep in the living room with the TV on low and half a bowl of popcorn on the coffee table. I woke up when I heard his boots on the porch and the screen door creak. The motion light flared through the curtains, then shut off after he came in and closed the door. He grumbled something about being tired and went upstairs. In the morning, over coffee, he said, "You ever notice how that light comes on when there's nobody?" I shrugged. "Probably cats, or the sensor's too sensitive." "I came up last night," he said, "and it was already on. I saw it from the bottom of the street. When I got to the porch, it turned off like it didn't care about me. Then it turned back on again when I opened the door." "Maybe it's on the fritz." He stared into his mug for a second. "Yeah, maybe." Then he glanced out the window. "You see those flowers?" I turned my head. The flowers on that back grave, the one set apart by the maple tree, were fresh again. Different this time. A low bunch of yellow mums in a little green plastic pot. The old ones were gone. "I thought those were white last week," I said. "They were," he said. "Who's visiting that one?" "I don't know. Somebody who likes to walk, I guess." We let it go. That's a theme, I guess. You see something that doesn't fit, and your brain folds it up and stuffs it into a drawer you label later. Around then, I started to put names to some of the stones. I'd walk through the cemetery on my lunch break, sometimes just to stretch my legs. Gravel crunched under my shoes. The air smelled like cut grass and damp earth. A chipmunk would dart along the edge of the fence and then freeze when it noticed me, then vanish into a hole. Near the front, the stones were easy to read. Families that had come over from Germany back in the day. Old dates. Little lambs carved into some of the smaller stones, the ones for kids. The further back you went, the more the ground felt uneven under your feet, like you were stepping over soft pockets where the earth had settled. Some stones leaned so far, you could have pushed them over with one hand. That grave in the corner kept catching my eye, though, the one set apart. The grass around it was shorter than you'd expect, like someone had trimmed it recently. The stone itself wasn't huge, just a simple upright marker, gray and smooth. The name on it was more worn than the others for some reason. I had to stand pretty close and squint to make it out. I won't say the exact name, but the last name was the same as my mom's maiden name. Same spelling and everything. Out here, that's not impossible. This town's full of old family lines that tangle up. But it still felt odd. The first name was different, but the letters had faded enough that I couldn't tell if I was reading it right. I could see the outline of the dates, though. 18-something to 19-something. Both were blurred with lichen, but I could tell the person had died young, late 20s maybe. "Find your long-lost uncle?" Mark called from the fence one afternoon when he saw me staring at it. "Something like that," I said, and that was the end of that. Things really started to feel off when the sounds changed. Usually, nights had a rhythm. Crickets, leaves scraping along the pavement. Once in a while, a car's tires hissing on the road if someone took the back way home. The radiator in the hallway clanged to life right around 10. There was always a low hum in the distance. Refrigerators, the factory, the town breathing. Then I began to notice quiet pockets. Places where sound dropped out like somebody hit mute. I'd be sitting on the couch, TV volume down low, and I'd suddenly realize I couldn't hear the crickets anymore. No wind, just the faint buzz of the TV and my own breathing. That silence would last maybe 10, 15 seconds, and then the world would click back on. Dog barking, a car door somewhere, a train horn way off. It was like being in a room where someone opens the door and realized they walked in on something. then backs out quick. One night, around 3 again. I know, it sounds like I'm making that up, but I checked. I was lying in bed, facing the window, when that dead quiet rolled over the house. It was like all the noise got sucked into the hallway. Then, very clear and calm, I heard someone say my name from downstairs. Caleb? It sounded like Mark. Same flat, tired way he talks when he's just come off a shift. I rolled over and grabbed my phone. It was 3:11 a.m. I stared at his contact for a second, then remembered he was on nights this week. I'd watched him leave at 5. The house was absolutely still. The radiator wasn't even knocking. No pipes, no wood creaks, nothing. I told myself I'd dreamed it, or that the TV in the next house over had bled through the walls. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, waiting for some other sound. Eventually, the crickets came back. A semi rolled by on the highway, way off. I heard a clack in the radiator again. Life resumed. The next morning, I almost convinced myself it hadn't happened. "Man, you look like crap," Mark said when he got home around 8. He tossed his keys on the table and opened the fridge. "You sleep at all?" "Not really," I said. "We gotta do something about that motion light. It keeps waking me up." He snorted. "You think that's bad? Try walking up the hill at 2 in the morning and watching it turn on before you're in range. It's like it knows you're coming." He said it lightly, but he didn't smile when he said it. Another day, I was coming back from the office with a folder of old claim forms I needed to cross-check. It was one of those windy afternoons where every loose leaf in the county decides your yard is home. The maple by the corner grave was shedding hard. Leaves skittered across the street and piled against the fence. The iron gate rattled once, twice, then settled. As I came up the walk, I saw that the flowers on that corner grave were new. Again. This time, they were simple white daisies in a glass jar. The jar caught the light, just barely, through the branches. No other graves had anything fresh on them, just that one. I was tired and a little annoyed at work, so I think that's why, instead of just walking inside, I crossed the street and went up to the fence. The latch was stiff under my hand. It squeaked when I lifted it and pushed the gate open. Gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked back between the stones. There were more names with my mom's last name than I'd realized. Whole family plots. I passed one with 4 stones in a row, all siblings, all dead in the same year. In the early 1900s. I told myself it was probably some old illness. Flu. Something like that. By the time I reached the corner grave, I felt oddly self-conscious, like I was barging into someone's living room. The air under the maple felt cooler than the rest of the cemetery, like the shade dug a little deeper there. I could smell damp dirt and something faintly metallic, maybe from the fence. Up close, the stone was smoother than I'd thought. My fingers brushed over the letters without meaning to. I could see the name clearly this time. All of it. Same last name as my mom. First name I recognized from one of those old family charts she used to make when I was a kid. The dates put this person's death about 100 years ago. To the day, give or take a week, from when we'd moved into the house. I pulled my hand back and realized my fingers were cold. My breath fogged a little in front of my face, even though it wasn't that chilly out. Something rustled in the grass behind me. I turned, expecting a chipmunk or a bird. Nothing was moving. I laughed at myself under my breath, picked a dead leaf off my jacket, and walked back home. That night, the motion light went on 3 separate times between 3 and 4 in the morning. The first time, I half sat up in bed, listened, and then lay back down. The second time, I checked my phone and thought about getting up, but didn't. The third time, I actually went to the window and peeked through the curtains. The porch was empty. The light was bright enough that it turned the iron fence across the street into a row of sharp black lines. Beyond it, I could see the pale shapes of the tombstones and the dark bulk of the maple tree. The corner grave was just a darker patch in the darkness. I swear the flowers on it were brighter than they had any right to be. But maybe that's just my brain remembering it that way. A couple days later, I had to go by the county records office for work. While I was there, I figured I'd ask about our house. Mostly curiosity. Old houses have histories, and it's the kind of thing you think about when you're alone too much. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses, pushed up on her head, pulled out a big binder, and flipped through pages. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking, each second a little too loud. "Here it is," she said. "Built 1896, been in and out of a couple families." "Any idea who owned it before our landlord?" I asked. She skimmed lower. "Looks like it was in the same family line for a long time. A lot of the same surname here." She tapped the page. It was my mom's maiden name. I'd expected that by then, but still. Got transferred into a trust about 20 years ago, then sold off after that. Nothing unusual. "Anybody ever complain about living across from the cemetery?" I tried to say it like a joke. She gave me a quick look over the top of her glasses. "People don't usually complain to us about that sort of thing," she said. "You having issues?" No, I said. "Just curious." She shut the binder a little faster than she needed to. Old families in this town like to keep things close. Land, church, cemetery. It's all kind of tangled. "You need copies of anything?" I said no, thanked her, and left. By then, I'd started to notice a pattern in the nights. The motion light, the silence, the feeling of someone standing just out of sight. You can tell when a hallway is empty, and you can tell when it isn't, even if you can't say how. The first time I saw the footprints was after a rain. We'd had one of those steady, soaking autumn rains that last all day and leave everything smelling like wet leaves and cold concrete. The cemetery looked darker, the stones sharper. Water beaded on the iron fence and dripped from the maple leaves in steady plinks. I came home late from work, kicking mud off my boots on the porch mat before I went inside. I locked the door behind me out of habit, flipped on the hall light, and shrugged off my jacket. Water tapped against the windows. The house smelled like damp wood and whatever leftovers Mark had heated up. I was halfway to the kitchen when I saw them. Muddy footprints started about 5 feet inside the front door. Not on the mat, not on the threshold, but on the hardwood floor in the hallway. They were faint, like the mud had mostly dried by then, but they were there. Bare feet. You could see the toes, the ball of the foot, the heel. They pointed away from the door, down the hall, toward the living room. My first thought was that Mark had come in with wet socks or something and tracked mud around before taking them off. I called his name. No answer. I followed the prints carefully, not stepping on them. They faded out right where the hallway sent into the living room, as if the person had just stopped, or the mud had completely worn off. "Mark," I said again. "You home?" No answer. The house hummed quietly. Fridge, ceiling fan, water heater in the basement. No TV, no music. I checked his room. Bed made, no clothes on the floor, no boots by the door. His truck keys were gone from the hook. He was at work. I went back to the front door and checked the lock. Deadbolt was still turned. Chain latch still hanging. The mat was damp from where I'd wiped my own boots, but there were no footprints leading up to it. Just the ones that started inside. I stood there for a long minute, listening to the rain. Eventually, I grabbed a roll of paper towels and wiped up the prints one by one. The floor squeaked under my hand in the quiet. When Mark came home in the morning, I told him what I'd seen, leaving out how my hands had been shaking slightly while I cleaned. "How do you know you didn't make them?" he asked. "They were bare feet," I said. "I was wearing boots, and I came home after you left." He frowned, rubbed his face. "Maybe you tracked mud in earlier and didn't notice until later," he said. "You know how wood dries weird." "Maybe," I said. We both knew I hadn't been home earlier. Over the next week, little things went wrong in the house. Doors I was sure I'd closed would be cracked open. The drawer with the cutlery in the kitchen would be left slightly ajar when I came down in the morning. The bathroom light would be on when no one was in there. Nothing big, nothing dramatic, just nudges, like someone learning where things went. One evening, I was on the couch eating dinner off a plate balanced on my knees. The news was on, low. It was already dark outside. The porch light had clicked on around 6 and stayed on. I heard the screen door creak very softly, the way it did when somebody opened it slow. Then I heard the click of the main doorknob turning, once, twice, like someone testing it. My whole body went tense. I set my plate on the coffee table and muted the TV. The only sound was the radiator ticking and the faint tap of branches against the front windows. After a few seconds, I told myself it was the wind tugging on the frame or the old wood swelling. I stood up, walked to the hallway, and looked at the door. The deadbolt was engaged. The chain latch was hanging the way we left it when we were home. I put my hand on the doorknob and felt it. Cold, like I'd left it out in the snow. My palm stuck to it for a second before I pulled back. "Hey," Mark called from upstairs, his voice sharp. "You just get home?" "No," I said. "I've been here. Why?" "Thought I heard you come in," he said. "Like 2 minutes ago." I didn't answer that. We both let it hang. The next time I heard my name, there was no mistaking it. It was another 3-something in the morning. I'd fallen asleep in the living room with the TV off, which I don't usually do. I woke up because the house felt wrong. The air was cold on my face, colder than it should have been with the heat on. No noise from outside, no rumble of a train or anything. Just that deep, hollow quiet. "Caleb?" It came from the doorway to the hall this time, just behind me. Clear, conversational, like someone asking if I was awake. It wasn't Mark's voice. It wasn't anyone I knew. It was calm, neither friendly nor unfriendly. Just sure I would answer. I didn't move. Every muscle in my body locked. I could see the faint reflection of the window in the black TV screen. The porch light was on, picking out the bars of the iron fence. Part of me wanted to turn my head and look into the doorway. Another part of me was absolutely certain that if I did, I would see nothing at all, and that might be worse. The voice didn't repeat itself. After a few seconds, the fridge kicked on in the kitchen with a low hum. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked, just once. The spell broke. A couple days after that, I went back to the records office, this time with a different excuse for work, but really because that corner grave had been on my mind. The clerk recognized me. "Back again?" she said. "Yeah," I said, holding up a manila folder. "Claims. But I had a question about the cemetery too. The one across from my house." Her mouth tightened just a little. "What about it? Do you have plots mapped out? Like who's buried where?" She sighed, went to a filing cabinet, and pulled out an old, folded map. The edges were soft and yellowed. She spread it on the counter. Little handwritten names filled the squares. Some were crossed out, some underlined. "Yours is what street again?" she asked. I told her. She traced a finger along the edge of the cemetery, then tapped a box near the corner. "That one?" she said. "Yeah," I said. Her finger rested on the name. It was the same as the stone, same first and last name. "Anything weird about it?" I asked. She hesitated. "Paperwork's incomplete," she said finally. "We don't have a full record for that family. A lot of old deaths in this town were handled informally." "Informally how?" She folded the map back up, slower than she'd opened it. "Just means not everything got written down," she said. "We don't always know who exactly is where, or when. People buried on their own land, then the town grew around them, that sort of thing. So that grave might not be what the marker says?" She gave me a flat look. "Those graves aren't what you think they are," she said. "They're not separate." Not really. I waited for her to explain, but she just slipped the map back into the drawer and shut it. The metal clanged more loudly than it needed to. On my way home, I walked the long way, around the back of the cemetery. The iron fence back there had a spot where the bars were bent, like someone had forced them apart a long time ago. The ground along the outside edge was sunken in places, as if there were more underneath than the stones admitted. That night, Mark and I were sitting at the table. He'd made pasta, and we were both eating more out of habit than hunger. The house felt hollow. "Do you ever feel like there's one more person in this house than there should be?" he asked suddenly, not looking up from his plate. I swallowed. "Sometimes," I said. He nodded once, like that confirmed something for him. "I hear someone walking when you're gone," he said. "Not just creaks, actual steps, from your room to the bathroom, from the bathroom to the stairs, then nothing." "You sure it's not the heat coming on?" "Yeah," he said. "I'm sure." We didn't talk much after that. The fork scraping the plates sounded too loud. The last really clear thing that happened was stupidly simple. Just paper. I was going through an old box of family stuff my mom had given me years ago. Birth certificates, photocopied pages from some ancestor's Bible, little notes. I'd never really looked through it since we moved. I was sitting at the dining room table, the cemetery right there out the window, light slanting in across the pages. Halfway down the stack, I found a folded sheet with a rough family tree on it. My mom's handwriting, listing out parents, grandparents, cousins, all the way back. At the bottom, under a faint, almost illegible name, was a note she'd written in parentheses. "Died young. Story was she never really left the house." It was the same name as the grave in the corner. Same first, same last, down to the spelling. I stared at it for a long time. Outside, the wind picked up, pushing leaves along the pavement in little scrapes and whispers. The iron fence rattled once, then went still. I got up, walked to the window, and looked out. The flowers on that grave, red this time, low roses, were fresh. The dirt in front of the stone looked slightly disturbed, like someone had knelt there recently. Our porch light, which shouldn't have been on in the middle of the afternoon, clicked on and flooded the front step. Behind me, the screen door creaked very softly. I turned around. The door was closed. The latch was resting where it always did. The house smelled faintly like damp earth, just for a moment, then like itself again. I could tell you a lot of things after that, but honestly, it all blurs together. Little noises, doors not quite where we left them, the feeling of someone standing just behind you when you brush your teeth with the bathroom door open. Waking up already turned toward the window, looking straight at that corner of the cemetery without knowing why. I still walk through there sometimes on my lunch break. I still tell myself there are reasonable explanations for everything. Buildings settle, lights glitch, people forget what they did. Families leave stories behind that grow bigger than they should. But even on the weeks when we're both out of town, when no one goes near that place, no one walks our street, no one touches the gate, there's one thing I can't argue with, and I've tried. The flowers on that grave are always fresh. My name is Derek, and I'm from Herman, Missouri. I guess the main thing you should know is that I never thought much about cemeteries before I moved into this house. Where I grew up, the only graveyard I ever saw was out by a church on a hill, and you only noticed it if you were bored during a long drive. In Herman, the cemetery is basically my front yard. You step off my porch, cross a narrow street with broken pavement and a strip of gravel, and there it is, a small 1850s cemetery behind an old iron fence, neat and trimmed near the entrance, a little wilder and tangled once you go farther back. I live there with my cousin. His name's Tyler. He moved in when he got a job at the big warehouse just outside town. I'd already been in Herman a couple years. I work as an inventory specialist for a farm supply place. The kind of job where you spend more time scanning barcodes than talking to anyone. It's not exciting, but it pays the rent, and I'm home by 5 most days, unless there's a truck late from Kansas City. Our house is one of those 2-story places that's been split and unsplit a few times over the years. You can tell by the random doors that lead nowhere and the way the floor dips near the kitchen. The wood creaks when you walk, and the radiator makes these knocking sounds when it kicks on, like somebody tapping pipes in another room. The porch leans just a little toward the street. There's a screen door that squeaks whenever it closes, and in the evenings, you can hear it from inside when one of us steps out for air. Most nights, after work, I sit out there with a cheap beer and watch the light change over the cemetery. It sounds weird when I say it, but it's actually pretty peaceful. During the day, you see the small gravestones lined up almost straight, some with little lambs carved on them, some with big family names I've started to recognize around town. Near the front gate, the grass is short and there are these old oaks with low branches that creak when the wind comes off the river. Farther back, the ground gets uneven and the grass grows longer, especially along the back fence where it's kind of tangled with weeds. From the porch, you can see almost all of it. The iron fence along the street is about chest high on me, with a decorative gate that the city guys lock at dusk. Past that, toward the back, there's one spot that always caught my eye, even before any of this started. There's a single grave set apart from the others, close to the rear fence, off by itself like someone left it there by mistake. Around it, the stones are grouped into family plots with the same surname, little rectangles of stone borders. That one stone, though, just stands alone, partly sunk, the top tilted. In the evenings, when the sun goes down behind the trees, that corner falls into shadow first. Herman's not a big place. We've got the usual small town stuff. One main drag with brick storefronts, a couple of bars, a gas station, a grocery store that closes too early, and churches sprinkled around. On quiet nights, you can hear the distant train horn across the river and the church bells if the wind's right. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on the porch, I'll hear a dog barking a few blocks away, or a screen door slam on another street. You start to recognize sounds: the gravel crunch of a neighbor's truck, the rattle of someone's loose muffler, the way fallen leaves scrape along the pavement when the wind picks up. Tyler likes to joke about us living across from the residents who never complain. That's his line. First week he moved in, he stood on the porch, looked straight at the rows of stones, and said, "At least the neighbors are quiet." He's got that kind of humor, dark but not serious. He works long shifts, sometimes nights, so we pass each other a lot. Him coming in when I'm heading out, or both of us half awake in the kitchen making coffee, while the radiator clicks and pops. At first, the cemetery was just part of the scenery. We'd sit out back some nights too, just listening to the insects, the soft hiss of the highway farther out. The wind moves through the trees, and you get that dry leaf smell in fall. The damp earth smell after rain. Walking to my truck in the morning, I'd hear the gravel crunch under my boots and see the morning light hitting the stone crosses and angels. It didn't feel creepy. If anything, it made the place seem older and grounded. Nothing weird, just history. The first thing I noticed that felt a little off didn't even seem like a big deal. It was the front gate. One night in late September, I was coming back from work a little later than usual. The sky was already dark, that flat kind of blue where you can't see clouds anymore, just the street lights. There's a thin motion light over our porch that flickers for a second before it really comes on. As I pulled into the driveway, the headlights swept across the cemetery fence, and I saw the iron gate swinging, back and forth, slow, like somebody had just gone through it. Now, the city guys from Parks and Rec, I see their truck there sometimes, are supposed to lock that gate at dusk. They do it almost every day. I've watched them. You hear the little clank of the latch from the porch if it's quiet enough. So seeing it swinging open like that made me pause a second. I got out, killed the engine, and listened. There wasn't any wind, not a strong one anyway. The leaves on the trees were mostly still. I could hear crickets and some kind of bug making a steady clicking sound in the grass. My porch light clicked on, and the screen door creaked a little, even though it wasn't moving. It does that sometimes when the temperature changes. I walked up to the porch, still watching the gate. It swung one last time and then just stopped, like something had been holding it. I remember thinking that maybe whoever locked it just didn't close it all the way, and gravity and time took care of the rest. That was it. I went inside. A couple nights later, I noticed flowers. I was on the porch again, this time after dinner. Tyler inside, watching something on his laptop. The air had that cool, damp feel, and I could smell wood smoke from somewhere down the block. The cemetery was quiet, just the faint shapes of stones against the dark grass. The street lamp at the corner throws enough light that you can see the first few rows pretty clearly. I saw something pale at the back, near that lone grave by the fence. At first, I thought it was a plastic bag caught on the stone. But the next day, driving past on my way to work, I looked closer. There was a small bouquet of flowers propped against that grave. White flowers, fresh. That wasn't strange by itself. People visit graves, it's normal. The odd part was that I'd never seen anyone back there, not once, and I sit on that porch a lot. The front of the cemetery gets visitors sometimes, older folks in Sunday clothes or a couple with kids walking through. But that back corner, nobody. I figured whoever left them came early, maybe before I woke up. No big deal. About a week later, the flowers changed. This time they were yellow. Same size bundle, same spot, just a different color. The white ones hadn't wilted yet, at least not as much as I'd expect in the sun. And now there was this new cluster propped right in front. I noticed it because I was taking the trash out and the wind shifted, bringing that faint, sweet flower smell across the street. I paused at the curb, bags in hand, and stared a second. The crickets were going, and a dog barked a couple streets away. Nothing else. I dumped the trash and told myself whoever was doing this just came and went between my trips outside. People have routines. Maybe they came on their lunch break. That same night, our porch light clicked on by itself. It's one of those motion sensor ones, pointed toward the cemetery more than the door. I was at the kitchen sink, washing a plate. Tyler was in the hallway on his phone, and the light outside flashed on hard. You could see the bright rectangle of it on the floorboards, and the little shadows of the railing. Tyler leaned over, looked through the window. "Cat?" he said. "Probably," I said. We get strays cutting across the yard sometimes, and raccoons when the trash pickup gets delayed. I dried the plate, listened for the sound of something on the porch, but there was just this quiet hum from the fridge and the ticking of the old clock by the doorway. "Don't see anything," Tyler said. But he didn't sound worried. He let the curtain fall back and wandered off. The light stayed on for the full cycle, then clicked off. It started happening more often. The porch light would flare on when nobody was near the door. Sometimes it would do it twice in one night, always facing the cemetery. I kept telling myself it was bugs, or the sensor was dying. The house is old. Things fail. One Friday, I was out there late, around midnight. I had one foot hooked on the rung of the porch rail, beer in hand, just kind of zoning out. The air was still, but cool enough that I could feel it through my t-shirt. Down in the grass, cicadas and crickets did that loud chorus thing. Then all at once went quieter, like somebody turned a knob. I watched my breath a little, even though it wasn't cold enough to see much. Across the street, the cemetery sat there the way it always does, just stones and dark grass and that iron fence. As I watched, I heard it, someone saying my name. Derek. Not loud, not a shout, Just this soft, careful voice, like someone testing if I was still awake. It came from somewhere near the front rows, off to the right. I froze, beer halfway to my mouth, and squinted into the dark. "Ty?" I called over my shoulder. Nothing from inside. After a second, the screen door squeaked a little as I pushed it open and leaned in. "Tyler?" He was on the couch, headphones on, eyes on his laptop. He looked up, saw my face, and pulled one ear cup off. "Yeah." "You call me just now?" I said. He shook his head. "No, man. Why?" "Nothing," I said. "Thought I heard you." I went back out, stood there a minute longer. The insects started up again. A car went by at the far end of the street, tires hissing on the pavement. The cemetery just sat there, empty. I told myself it was the wind moving through the fence, or some kid a block over saying something that just sounded like my name. That kind of thing happens. Sound travels weird at night. The thing with the flowers kept going. Every few days, they changed. Sometimes white, sometimes yellow, sometimes red, always fresh. No wilted ones left behind, no dead stems tossed aside. Just a new, neat little bundle leaning against that one lonely grave at the back. "Man, that's weird," Tyler said one afternoon. We were both on the porch, and he was squinting over his coffee at the spot. "You ever actually see anybody out there messing with those?" "No," I said. "Never." "You watch that place like it's a TV," he said. "And you've never seen them?" "Nope." He took a sip, shrugged. "Maybe they come when you're at work." "Every 3 days?" I said. He didn't answer, just kind of grunted and went back inside. It was Tyler who first mentioned the time. I woke up one night and lay there, staring at the red digits of the cheap alarm on my dresser. 3:13 a.m. The house was very still. No radiator knocking, no trucks on the street. I heard a faint crunch from outside, like someone walking on gravel. I held my breath and listened. It came again, slow, spaced out. Not the steady roll of a car, or the quick scrabble of an animal. Just step, step, then nothing. I told myself it was someone cutting through the street, maybe stumbling a little from a bar. I fell back asleep. The next morning, Tyler was at the kitchen table, rubbing his eyes, staring at his coffee. "You ever wake up at the same time a lot?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "Why?" "Kept waking up last couple nights," he said. "Always around 3:13, stupid specific. Checked the clock each time." "Yeah?" I said. I cracked an egg into the pan and listened to the sizzle drown out the radiators knocking. "What woke you up?" "Dunno," he said. "Thought I heard the front steps, gravel maybe, or the screen door. Probably just the house settling or something." The screen door does that. It pops a little, even if nobody's touching it, especially when the temperature drops at night. I told him that, and he nodded. But he looked tired in that way. That's not just lack of sleep, more like he'd had a string of bad dreams. I didn't really think we had any kind of pattern until the porch light started matching the time. One night, I couldn't sleep. I was lying there, just staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the fridge through the wall and the occasional tick of the wood cooling. The room had that slightly closed-in smell, like dust and laundry detergent and old paint. I rolled over and checked the clock. 3:12. I was still looking at it when the porch light clicked on. I could see the glow from under my bedroom door, the way it changed the color of the hallway floor. I got up, padded out, the wood cool under my feet. The house creaked once under my weight. I walked to the living room window and pushed the curtain aside. The light was on, bright, angled out toward the street and the cemetery gate. The fence cast these thin shadows across the grass. Past that, the rows of stones were lit just enough that I could see their tops and the trunks of the trees. Nothing moved. I watched for a while. The insects were quiet. The wind was almost nothing, just the occasional leaf scraping the pavement near the curb. The light stayed on for its full timer cycle, then snapped off. The darkness felt heavier after that. I told myself again it was a bug or a glitch. I didn't go back to bed for a while. A week or so later, I stopped by City Hall on my lunch break. I'd convinced myself I was just curious about the house. Old places have histories. I figured I'd see when it was built, maybe who owned it first. They've got this records room with a clerk who's always there. This older guy with glasses that slide down his nose. He took me back to a shelf with thick binders and maps. "You on East 3rd, right?" he said. "Yeah," I said. "The one across from the cemetery." He made this little ah sound, like he'd just remembered something. "That one. Yeah. Been there a long time." We found the parcel on a zoning map. You could see the rectangle of the cemetery marked off, then the street, then our house lot, a skinny little shape with measurements in faded ink. In the corner of the cemetery block near the back, there was a section shaded differently. No labels, just this faint outline. "What's that part?" I asked, pointing. "Older section," he said. "Some of the old family plots. Records on those aren't great." He flipped open another binder, ran his finger down a list of names tied to plot numbers. When he got to ours, he frowned a little, then turned a page. There was a section where the paper looked newer, like it had been replaced. A note in the margin read, "Data incomplete." "Guess somebody lost that page," he said. "We had a flood in the basement back in the 80s. Some of the old stuff got ruined." "So there's no record of the back corner?" I said. He shrugged. "Not a good one. Some old family, I think. Morton. Something with an M." I felt a tiny prickle at that, but I didn't say anything. Tyler's last name is Morgan, same as mine, obviously. We're cousins. There are plenty of Morgans in the world. It didn't mean anything. "Anyway," the clerk said, closing the book. "Nobody's been buried back there in a long time. City uses the front sections now, easier to maintain." When I mentioned the flowers, he went quiet. Just for a second, but enough that I noticed. "What flowers?" he said. "On the grave by the back fence," I said. "They're always fresh. Just thought it was interesting you didn't know who was still visiting." He pushed the binder back onto the shelf a little harder than he needed to. "Like I said," he said, "those records aren't complete. That's all I got." I was about to say something else, but he'd already started walking back to the front desk. After that, I asked our neighbor about it. There's a woman a few houses down who walks her little dog past our place every morning. I don't know her name. I just know the dog's name is Pepper because she talks to him a lot. One morning, as she stopped to let Pepper sniff a patch of grass near our mailbox, I said, "Hey, you've been here a while, right?" "Most of my life," she said. "Why? You know anything about that cemetery?" I nodded across the street. The air smelled like damp leaves and coffee. A train horn sounded faintly from across the river. She gave it a quick glance, then looked back at me. "I know it's older than I am," she said. "There's a grave at the back," I said. "By the fence. Somebody keeps leaving flowers there. You ever see who does that?" Her face did this subtle shift, like she was trying not to react. "I didn't think anyone was still going back there," she said. "But the flowers." She tugged gently on Pepper's leash. "Well, I don't look too close," she said. "Some things are personal. People like their privacy, even after they're gone." She started to move away. "You don't know who's buried there?" I asked. She didn't turn fully back, just angled her head a little. "Those graves aren't what you think they are," she said. I opened my mouth to ask what she meant, but she was already walking, the little dog's nails clicking on the sidewalk. I watched them go and listened to the distant crows calling from somewhere near the river bluff. Around that time, things started feeling different inside the house. One rainy evening, I got home after dark. The street was shiny with water, reflecting the orange glow of the street lamps. The wipers on my truck squeaked as I shut them off, and the engine ticked as it cooled. I ran up the porch steps, shoes splashing in little puddles. The porch light clicked on as I got close. Inside, the house smelled damp, but more than it should have. Not just the usual mustiness of old wood. It smelled like wet soil, the kind you get under your nails when you dig. "Ty?" I called out, shutting the door. The screen door creaked as it bounced once and settled. No answer. Tyler was on a night shift that week, so it made sense. Still, the smell bothered me. I flipped on the hallway light and looked down. There were faint muddy footprints on the floor. Not full prints, more like smudges, spaced out the distance of steps. They started near the front door and went a few feet into the living room, then faded out near the couch where I usually sit. I just stood there for a second, listening. The radiator gave a little click, but it wasn't running. Somewhere in the walls, the house made a low settling sound. Outside, the rain hit the windows in soft waves. I told myself I must have tracked it in earlier without noticing, or Tyler had done it before he left and it just dried weird. It still bothered me that the prints seemed to just end. You'd expect more, or some dirt by the kitchen, but there was nothing. Just those faint smudges and then clean floor. I wiped them up with a damp rag and tried not to think about how strong the wet earth smell had been. The back door started acting strange too. It leads out to a tiny yard with a leaning shed. We almost never use it. We usually come and go through the front. But a few times when I got up in the morning, I'd find the back door not fully latched, just a hair open, enough that you could feel a thin draft if you put your hand near the frame. "You leave this open last night?" I asked Tyler one morning. He shook his head. Didn't even go back there. "Maybe it doesn't shut all the way," I said. "Yeah," he said, "maybe." But he looked unsettled. That night, I made a point of locking it myself, feeling the deadbolt turn, pushing the door to make sure it was solid. In the middle of the night, I woke up, no idea why. The house was silent. No trucks outside, no train, no dogs. I listened a second, then got up and padded down the hall. The air in the living room felt cooler, especially on the side facing the cemetery. The wood under my feet felt almost cold. I went to the back door, turned on the small overhead light. The door was closed. The bolt was still turned. I told myself I was getting in my own head. Houses make noises. Air shifts. Doors move. It was a night or two after that when I heard the couch. I was in the kitchen, rinsing a glass, the tap running. The radiator gave a little clank, and then I heard it. The sound of someone sitting down on the couch in the living room. Springs compressing. A soft shift in the cushions. I froze, water still running. "Ty?" I called. He was supposed to be on an early shift, but sometimes his schedule changed, and I forgot. No answer. I dried my hands, walked to the doorway, and looked in. The room was empty. The couch was just sitting there. Old plaid blanket folded over one arm. Nothing out of place. I stood there a minute, watching, half expecting to see the fabric move or feel something. The only sounds were the faint hum of the fridge and a car passing at the far end of the street. Somewhere outside, a train horn blew, low and distant. I turned off the kitchen light and sat down on the couch myself. The cushions gave under my weight. The spot where I first heard the sound felt a little cooler than the rest, but that could have been in my head. I didn't tell Tyler about that one. The thing that finally pushed me to go into the cemetery itself was stupid, really. It was a Sunday afternoon in October, bright and cool, with wind moving the branches and dry leaves skittering across the street. Church bells had just finished somewhere up the hill. From the porch, I watched the sunlight catch on that one gravestone by the back fence. The flowers there that day were red, very bright. The rest of the cemetery was empty. I stood up, put my hands in my jacket pockets, and walked down the steps. The gravel crunched under my shoes. The wind moved my hair a little, brought the smell of dry leaves and something faintly sweet from the direction of the graveyard. The iron gate at the front was closed but not locked. The metal latch was resting in the catch without the padlock through it, so my fingers were cold around the bar as I lifted it and let myself in. It was quiet in there. The sounds of town felt farther away somehow. A crow called from a tree near the back. I walked along the gravel path between the rows. The grass near the front was short, trimmed. You could see the names and dates on the stones clearly. Some went back to the 1860s, some newer. There were small family plots edged with stone, all with the same last names you see on mailboxes in town. As I got farther back, the grass got longer. There were spots where it had grown up around the bases of the stones, and others where the ground had sunk a little, making the markers lean. The path thinned out and turned more to packed dirt. When I stepped off toward the back fence, the sound of my shoes changed. No more gravel crunch, just the soft press of ground and the faint crackle of dry weeds. The air felt cooler in that corner, even in the sun. Maybe it was the shade from the trees, I don't know. The insects had been making this soft background noise, but as I got closer to that lone grave, they eased off, like someone turning down a radio. The stone itself was smaller up close. The top was chipped, and lichen covered some of the date. Someone had cleared around the base recently. The grass there was shorter, and you could see fresh dirt where it had been pulled. The flowers were placed at the foot of the stone. Red carnations, I think. The stems were still damp. I bent down and brushed a bit of moss away from the name. It took a second for my brain to line everything up. Tyler Morgan, it said. The letters were shallow but readable. The dates below were 1958 to 1979. I just stared at it. My cousin was born in 1994. Entirely different person, different life. But seeing his exact name there, first and last, on that lonely stone in the corner of the cemetery, across from our house, hit me in a way I can't really explain. I stood there a long time. My legs started to feel a little shaky. Not from anything dramatic, just from standing still too long. The wind moved through the trees, and some leaves fell, scratching their way down the trunk behind me. I told myself it was a coincidence. Names repeat, families reuse them. There are a lot of Morgans. There are a lot of Tylers. That doesn't mean anything on its own. Still, as I straightened up and looked around, everything felt slightly shifted, like the world had tilted just enough that I had to adjust my balance. I heard a car pass outside the fence, but it sounded muffled, like it was gone before it should have been. When I got back to the house, Tyler was at the table, flipping through some junk we'd never sorted. Old mail from before we moved in. A few yellowed envelopes the landlord had never picked up. "Hey," he said. "You know the guy before us had my name?" My throat felt dry. "What?" He held up an old electric bill. The paper was soft and starting to curl at the edges. "Look," he said. "Tyler Morgan. Different middle initial, though. Probably some old dude. The date's from like 2003. Guess he lived here for a while." I tried to swallow, but my mouth felt sticky. "You keep that?" I said. "Just found it in the drawer," he said. "Thought it was funny. What are the odds, right?" I looked past him, out the window. From our kitchen, you can see the top row of graves and the trees beyond. I couldn't quite see the back fence from there, but I knew exactly where it was. "What's wrong with you?" he asked. "Nothing," I said. "Just tired." That night, I woke up again at 3:13. I didn't look at the clock first. I just knew. I lay there a minute, listening. The house was very quiet. Then I heard it, the soft crunch of gravel, slow and deliberate, right outside. I got up and went to the window that overlooks the cemetery. The moon was out, making everything look flattened, almost colorless. The iron fence cast long shadows. I could see the outline of the stones, the trees in the back, the slight sag in the ground where that lonely grave sat. The porch light came on by itself. It washed the front yard in a harsh, yellowish glow. For a second, I thought I saw a shape just inside the cemetery gate, but when I blinked, it was just the shadow of the tree by the corner. Behind me, in the hallway, I heard the floor creak, just once, not the random popping it does when the temperature changes. It sounded like a step, like someone putting their weight down carefully. "Tyler?" I called, too quietly for him to hear if he was sleeping. No answer. I remembered the muddy smudges on the floor, the back door that wouldn't stay latched, the way the couch had shifted under invisible weight. I thought about the flowers, always fresh, always changing, never once seeing the person who brought them. The air felt colder near the door that faces the cemetery side. I could see my breath a little if I breathed out slowly. The insects outside were silent. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once and then stopped. I didn't go outside. I just stood in the hallway for a while, feeling the house around me, the old wood, the pipes, the faint hum of the fridge. Eventually I went back to bed, though I don't remember falling asleep. I still live there. So does Tyler. Life goes on. I go to work, scan my inventory, listen to the forklift beeping in the warehouse. Tyler complains about his shifts. We make coffee, we take the trash out, we watch shows on the couch. Sometimes, when I'm on the porch in the evening, the light will click on with no one near it, and I'll look over at that cemetery. The gate will be closed, the iron fence steady, the stones quiet. Then I'll notice that the flowers on that grave have changed again. Always fresh, always neat. The other day, the neighbor with the dog walked by. She nodded at me, then glanced at the cemetery for just a second before looking away. "You boys sleeping okay over there?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Why?" She shook her head. "Just wondered," she said. "Houses like that, so close to old ground. Sometimes people notice things." "Like what?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just tugged on Pepper's leash and kept walking. I don't have proof of anything. Maybe there's a relative who comes very early with flowers. Maybe the porch light sensor is faulty. Maybe the muddy footprints were mine and I just forgot. Maybe someone with the same name as my cousin lived there before, and someone else with the same name decades before that, buried alone in the back corner of a small cemetery in a small town. I tell myself all of that over and over when I wake up at 3:13 and listen for gravel, when I hear the faint creak of the floor in the hallway, when I see the back door and check the lock twice. I don't know what the records at City Hall used to say before the pages got ruined. I don't know why the clerk went so quiet, or why the neighbor told me those graves aren't what I think they are. I don't know who sits on the couch when I'm in the kitchen, or who leaves those flowers at the grave that carries my cousin's name. What I do know is that the line between that cemetery and this house doesn't feel as clear as it looks on the map. Standing at the window at night, watching the darkness press up against the iron bars, I've started to think that line was never really for us in the first place. The fence was never meant to keep anyone out. My name is Derek, and I'm from Astoria, Oregon. I live in a small rental house on a quiet street that most people only use when they're lost or trying to avoid the main road. It's a one-story place with chipped blue paint and a sagging porch. The landlord called it historic when I signed the lease, which is another way of saying the windows stick and the floors tilt a little. What sold me on it, weirdly enough, was the view. Right across the narrow street, on a bit of a rise, there's this modest early 1900s cemetery behind an old iron fence. It isn't big. Maybe a couple dozen rows of stones, some taller monuments near the middle, and one small gravel path that loops through. Most people hear cemetery across the street and think horror movie. But honestly, At first, it was kind of nice. The trees over there move in the wind the way you watch waves roll in. On dry days, you can hear gravel crunch under shoes if someone's visiting a grave. When the sun sets, the light hits some of the taller stones just right, so they glow for a minute, then go dark. It's quiet. No loud neighbors, no parties, just stones and grass, and the occasional crow. I don't live there alone. My housemate is Tyler, a coworker who needed a place when his last roommate moved out and took most of the furniture with him. We both work at the same clinic on the edge of town. I'm a medical billing clerk. He's in scheduling. It's not thrilling work, but it pays on time, and you go home without any of it stuck to you. We joke about how our jobs are just moving numbers and names around until they line up the way insurance companies want. Our schedules are pretty similar. We're usually home by 5:30. He drops his keys in the same little bowl by the door every time. I put my bag on the same chair. We talk about dumb stuff. A patient who yelled at the front desk, a computer that crashed at the worst moment, which one of us is going to cave and buy a new coffee maker. Tyler likes to crack jokes about the cemetery. First week he moved in, he stood on the porch with his hands on his hips and said, "Well, at least the neighbors are quiet." The town itself isn't big once you step away from the waterfront and the tourists. Past the main streets and the fish places, you get into older neighborhoods like ours, where the houses lean a little, and you can still see original glass in some windows. On Sundays, you can hear church bells from a few blocks away if the wind is right. At night, you sometimes catch a distant train horn from the tracks closer to the river. Cars thin out. You hear dogs barking far off, then nothing. In the summer, there are insects buzzing in the grass by the cemetery fence. And in the fall, you hear leaves scraping along the pavement when the wind picks up. The cemetery across from us looks better kept near the front. The grass along the fence is trimmed. The older stones close to the gate are washed clean by time and rain. But if you look farther back, past the larger family plots, it gets a little tangled. The grass is longer. Ivy creeps up a few stones. The land dips and rises in small, uneven waves, like some of the graves have settled. There are clusters of stones with the same surname, and a few of those tall obelisk monuments that were apparently popular 100 years ago. And then there's the one grave that caught my eye early on. It's small, maybe a child's. The stone is short and rounded at the top, with a name and dates that were hard to see from the road. There are always flowers on it. Not always new, but never completely dead. Sometimes simple plastic ones stuck in the ground. Sometimes fresh wildflowers in a jar. Sometimes it's one single white flower leaning over. I noticed it because nothing else in that back section gets that kind of attention. I'd see that little cluster of color back there every time I walked to my car. For months, it was just part of the scenery. I'd drink coffee on the porch before work, leaning against the rail, listening to the wood settle with small pops as the sun warmed it. Tyler would come out, glance at the cemetery, and make some offhand comment like, "They should rent out that space for Halloween tours," or, "If one of them starts paying rent, I'm moving out." It was background, peaceful. The first strange thing didn't even feel strange at the time. It was a windy Wednesday night in late fall. The kind of night where the air smells like wet asphalt and old leaves. I was at the kitchen sink doing dishes after dinner. Tyler had gone out to meet some people for a trivia night. I remember because he yelled that he might be late and not to deadbolt the door yet. Over the sink, there's a small window that looks straight across at the cemetery gate. The porch light was on, throwing this soft yellow circle over our steps and a thin stretch of road. Beyond that, it was just the darker shape of the cemetery and the faint outline of stones. As I stood there, I noticed the cemetery gate move. It's one of those old iron gates that squeaks when it opens. I've heard it in the daytime when people come and go, but that night, I didn't hear anything. I just looked up and saw it swinging inward fast, like someone had shoved it hard, then stopping with a little bounce. No one there. The street was empty. No car lights, no sound of footsteps on gravel. I figured it was the wind. It was gusty enough that I could hear the trees across the street rustling. Every now and then, a branch would scrape faintly against the iron fence, this thin, metallic noise. The porch light flickered once, and I cursed the wiring. I rinsed the last plate, turned off the water, and listened. The house made its usual noises, a low creak in the hallway, something shifting in the crawl space, the fridge kicking on. Then I heard it, very faint. A sound I first thought was a radio from somewhere down the street. It was music, a tune, slow and soft, the kind of thing someone would hum to a baby. A lullaby, but it sounded off. The timing wasn't steady. Notes dragged a little too long, then rushed to catch up, like the person humming couldn't hear themselves properly. It reminded me of someone singing underwater, if that makes any sense. Thick and broken. I stood by the sink, listening, my hands still wet. After a few seconds, it faded, or the wind drowned it out. I told myself one of the neighbors must have been playing something, though I couldn't think of any house close enough in that direction. I dried my hands and went back to the living room. When Tyler came home around 10, he dropped his keys in the bowl and said, "You leave the gate open for the zombies?" I looked at him, confused, and he jerked his thumb toward the front. "Cemetery gate. It's wide open. Wasn't like that earlier." I shrugged and said it was probably the wind. We joked about the city forgetting to lock up the dead. It was nothing. Little things kept happening after that. Always small, always easy to shrug off. I'd leave for work and notice that same gate open again, even on calm mornings. I'd see fresh flowers on that small grave in the back, even on days when the grass around it was wet and undisturbed, no footprints on the gravel near the path. Once, on a Saturday afternoon, I watched an older woman with a canvas bag walk in, visit 2 of the family plots near the front, and leave. She never went near the rear section, but the next morning there were new flowers on the child's grave. At night, every once in a while, I'd hear that tune again, soft, like someone humming from across the street. Sometimes it felt closer, like it was just on the other side of the window. Other times, it blended into the wind, and I'd only catch 1 or 2 notes before it was gone. I told myself it was someone's TV, or a phone, or some late-night show with a weird soundtrack. You can convince yourself of just about anything when you want to go to sleep. Tyler was the first one to say something about it out loud. We were on the porch one evening after work, both of us leaning against the railing, watching the light fade. The street was quiet. I remember hearing chipmunks chattering in the yard next door, then suddenly going silent all at once, like someone cut the sound. Tyler nodded toward the back half of the cemetery. "You ever notice that little grave?" he said. "Which one?" I asked, even though I knew. "The one with the flowers, way in the back there." He squinted. "I swear they're always fresh. Like, always. And I never see anyone go to it. Not once." I told him about the older woman and the family plots. He shrugged and said, "Yeah, but she didn't go that far back, right?" We fell quiet. The wind picked up a bit, and the porch light flickered again. In the distance, a tss and a dog barked, then another, then nothing. "You ever hear singing?" he asked. He said it casual, but he glanced at me quickly after, checking my face. "Like what?" I said. "Like a kid," he said. "Real quiet, late at night. It sounds like it's in the cemetery, or maybe from that house behind it. I don't know." I played dumb. "Probably someone's TV," I said. "Those houses behind there are closer than they look." He nodded like he wanted to believe that. "Yeah, guess so." After that, I started paying more attention. Not because I believed anything was wrong, but because once someone points out a pattern, you start tracking it without meaning to. I'd lie in bed and listen for it. Some nights there was nothing but wind and the occasional car. Other nights, I'd hear those slow, uneven notes drifting in through the window screen. It was never loud, just enough to make you think you were imagining it. Like when a song gets stuck in your head and you can't tell if you're actually hearing it or just remembering it. On my days off, when Tyler was at work and I had the house to myself, I'd find reasons to go out front, bring the trash can back from the curb, sweep leaves off the steps, tighten the loose screw on the screen door that always made it creak. I'd end up standing there, staring across the street, telling myself I was just people watching, even when there were no people to watch. The cemetery always looked the same. Gates sometimes open, sometimes closed. Gravel path with faint footprints here and there. Taller stones up front, shorter ones in the back. That one child's grave with the flowers. One day, it had a small stuffed bear sitting next to the stone, already a little damp from the morning dew. The bear never moved after that. It just slowly sagged and faded over a couple of weeks. I got curious about the history, in a very normal, boring way. I went to the little local historical society office one afternoon. It's tucked behind the library, more volunteers than staff. I asked the lady at the desk if they had any records on the cemetery across from my house. She gave me the kind of look people give you when you ask about something they've answered 100 times. Then she softened and said, "You mean Pioneer Hill? Yeah, we've got some stuff on that. You looking for a particular family?" I told her no, just general interest. She brought out a thin binder with photocopies of old maps, a list of burials, and some handwritten notes someone had added years back. I flipped through it at one of the little tables by the window. There were sections marked by family name, some plots dating back to 1908 or so. A note about a diphtheria outbreak, a small list titled Children's Graves. Some of the names had stars next to them, and a scribble in the margin, likely unmarked in ground. I tried to find the name from the small grave with the flowers, but I realized I didn't actually know it. I'd never gone that close, never walked inside the cemetery. I'd only seen it from across the street. It felt weird to admit that to myself. I knew its shape, its size, the way the light hit it, but not the name. When I asked the lady at the desk if there was a plot map, she hesitated. "We had one drawn up at some point," she said, "but parts of that back section were never properly recorded. Some of those stones sank or got moved. I think the city was going to redo the records, but..." She lifted her hands in a small shrug. "Budget. Do you know anything about a little grave in the back with flowers on it?" I asked. Her expression changed just slightly, not fear. More like discomfort. "People tend to take care of the children's plots," she said. "Sometimes they pick one and, adopt it." "Adopt it," I said. "Look after it," she said quickly. "Leave flowers, tidy it up, that kind of thing. Sometimes there's no family left." She reached out, took the binder back gently. "It's nice, really." On the walk home, the air smelled like salt and exhaust. A crow called from a phone line and then shut up when I passed underneath. I told myself what she said made sense. People get sentimental about things like that. They like to care for something. That was all it was. The singing got clearer after that, or maybe I was just listening for it more. Some nights I'd wake up and hear it right away, the same broken lullaby, always starting in the middle of a phrase, like whoever was humming had been going for a long time before I woke up. If I sat up and really focused on it, the sound would seem to move, like it was circling the house at a distance. Near the cemetery, then closer to the porch, then back across the road. Eventually it would fade or blend into the sound of the wind. Tyler started complaining about sleep. He'd come into the kitchen in the morning with shadows under his eyes, rubbing the back of his neck. "Do you ever hear that, kid?" he'd say. "Sometimes," I'd admit. "I think it's from the house behind the cemetery. Maybe they keep their window open." "I walked back there the other day," he said once, spreading jam on toast without really looking. "There's no house right behind that part. Just a field and some trees. And it's louder in our place than it is out on the sidewalk." I didn't have anything to say to that. The toaster clicked. The radiator in the living room made this hollow knocking sound as it turned on. like someone tapping from inside the wall. We both pretended not to jump. Things changed the night I heard humming inside the house. Not loud, just different. It was late, maybe 1 in the morning. Tyler was out of town visiting family. The house felt extra empty without his random noises. No late-night TV from his room, no muttered comments as he scrolled through his phone on the couch. I was already a little on edge because every tiny sound stood out. The fridge cycle, the screen door creaking as the wind nudged it, a branch brushing the siding. I had just turned off the lamp in the living room and was walking down the hall toward my bedroom when I heard it. That same lullaby, the thin, slow notes. Except this time, it didn't sound distant. It sounded like it was coming from the back room, the small one we used for storage. The door to that room was half open, a thin line of darkness. I stopped in the hall. The boards under my feet creaked once, then went still. The singing went on for another few seconds, then stopped mid-note, like someone had held their breath. The house went completely silent. Even the clock in the kitchen sounded too loud. I told myself it was a neighbor's TV, a phone, something bouncing weird through the walls. I stood there long enough that my legs started to ache, then shook my head and laughed, just to break the tension. "You're tired," I told myself. I went into my bedroom, shut the door, and left the hallway light on. In the morning, when I walked past the storage room on my way to the kitchen, I saw something on the floor just inside the doorway. Muddy prints, small, not a clear shoe tread, more like bare feet that had stepped in wet earth and then walked on the wooden floor. The prints went from the window toward the hall, then faded halfway. I stared at them for a good minute before I moved. My first thought wasn't ghosts. It was someone broke in, a kid. Maybe from the neighborhood. Maybe they came in through the window. My heart started going faster in that practical, panicked way you get when you think something real and dangerous might have happened. The window in that room was closed. The latch was still down. I checked it twice. No sign of forced entry. The screen outside was intact. The prints themselves were already drying by then, turning from dark to lighter brown. They didn't look smeared, like someone had run. It was more like whoever made them had walked slowly, step by step, and then just stopped. I cleaned them up. What else do you do? I got a wet rag and wiped the floor until my back hurt from bending over. The whole time, I was aware of the view out the front windows, the top edges of gravestones just visible over the bottom of the curtains. I avoided looking straight at them. When Tyler came back that night, I didn't mention the prints. I told myself I'd imagined them. Or maybe I'd tracked something in and it just looked weird in the morning light. You can warp your memory if you try hard enough. A few days later, he beat me home from work. I found him standing in the hallway when I came in, staring at the floor outside the storage room. His backpack was still on one shoulder, his hand frozen halfway to the key bowl. "You see this?" he said. His voice was flat. There were prints again, smaller this time. Or maybe I only told myself that. Just two side by side, like whoever it was had stood there a long time. "That's from before," I said quickly. "I missed a spot when I was cleaning." He looked up at me. "You never told me about this," he said. I didn't answer. The radiator knocked once in the living room. The sound made both of us flinch. After that, Tyler stopped joking about the cemetery. He kept his curtains closed most nights. He still slept fine, he said, but his eyes said something else. He suggested we get better locks, maybe a camera for the porch, just in case some kids are screwing with us. I told him it was a good idea. We never actually bought anything. The humming kept coming. Some nights it was faint, just a thread of sound under the wind. Other nights it felt like it was in the house again, right behind a wall or under the floor. I'd catch it near the kitchen one day, then near my bedroom the next. Always the same broken lullaby, never the whole song. One Sunday afternoon, I finally walked into the cemetery. I don't know why I picked that day. Maybe because it was bright and clear, the kind of day where nothing looks scary. The air was cool, and the sun was out just enough that I had to squint. The iron gate was closed, but not locked. It squeaked when I pushed it open, a sound I felt in my teeth. Gravel crunched under my shoes. Up close, the place felt smaller. The front section was as neat as it looked from the street. Someone had trimmed the grass recently. A few graves had flowers. A few had little flags or stones placed on top. As I walked farther back, the ground got more uneven. The grass was longer, in patches. Ivy crawled up one of the obelisks. I could see where some stones had sunk, the earth around them dipping. The child's grave with the flowers was even smaller than I expected. The stone was about knee-high, rounded at the top. Someone had scrubbed it clean at some point, because the name and dates were more legible than the others nearby. The flowers that day were white, starting to brown at the edges. They were stuck into the ground in a simple bunch. The name on the stone was Emily Tyler. The dates put her at about 6 years old. The year of death was 1932. I stood there a long time. The Tyler hit me first, obviously. Same last name as my roommate. Rationally, I knew that didn't mean much. It's not the rarest name in the world. The first name being Emily made it easier to dismiss. No connection, just a coincidence. Still, I felt this drop in my stomach, like missing the last step on the stairs. I looked around, half expecting to see someone watching me. There was no one. Just stones, trees, a crow hopping along the fence line. It called once, then flew off. On the way back toward the gate, I noticed something I hadn't seen from the road. On the far right side, near the back corner, there was a short row of stones that looked newer than the rest, but still old. Not polished marble, more like the same rough gray as the others, but less worn down. 4 in a row. Same last name on all of them. I stopped at the second one from the left. The name carved there was Derek Tyler. The dates didn't make sense. Born 1905, died 1932. Same year as the little girl. For a second, I honestly thought I was misreading it. I wiped at the letters with my sleeve, like maybe moss or dirt had filled in the lines wrong. But no, my first name, his last name. Same stone style as the others in that row. There are a lot of explanations you can reach for in a moment like that. Maybe my brain was overlaying what I expected to see. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe someone in the past had the same combined names by chance. People reuse names all the time. Families hand them down. You tell yourself all that at once. It piles up inside your head until you almost believe it. The wind picked up a little, making the trees above me whisper. I realized I couldn't hear any insects, even though it was warm enough that there should have been some sound. No distant cars, no dogs, just the faint rattle of the iron fence and my own breathing. I stepped back, forcing myself to walk calmly toward the gate. My shoes made steady crunches in the gravel. Halfway there, I heard it again. That same lullaby. Only this time, it sounded like it was right behind me, near my left shoulder. Low and thin, a child's voice humming through a closed mouth. I didn't turn around. I kept walking. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself the sound was in my head, triggered by reading old names and dates and letting my nerves get the better of me. By the time I reached the gate and stepped back onto the street, the humming had faded. That night, Tyler was quiet. He sat on the couch, scrolling on his phone, but his thumb wasn't really moving. The TV was on, some show neither of us were watching. At one point he said, "I heard it in the hallway last night." "Heard what?" I asked, even though I knew. "The singing," he said. "It was right outside my door, like a kid leaning against it." He tried to laugh and failed. I almost opened it and told them to knock like a normal person, but then it stopped. We sat there in the glow of the TV, not looking at each other. The radiator knocked twice in the corner. The screen door creaked a little as the wind moved it in its frame. Somewhere far away, a train horn sounded, long and low. I thought about telling him about the graves, about the names, I pictured his face when I said, "Hey, funny thing, there's a child named Emily Tyler buried over there, and an adult named Derek Tyler, and they died the same year." I couldn't think of a way to say it that didn't sound like I was trying to scare him on purpose, so I kept my mouth shut. Over the next few weeks, small things shifted. We started locking the doors more carefully. I checked the windows twice before bed. Sometimes I'd find the porch light on in the morning when I was sure I'd turned it off, still burning weakly in the dawn. Sometimes I'd wake up and my bedroom door would be open a few inches when I always closed it fully. The singing never got loud. That almost made it worse. It was always right at the edge of hearing, like someone humming just under their breath in the next room. It would slip in between ordinary sounds, the fridge, the wind, the click of the thermostat. You'd hear 2 or 3 notes, think you imagined it, and then realize you were holding your breath. I tried to find that lullaby online once, just to prove to myself it was something common. I typed in fragments of what I thought the melody did, looked up old songs, nursery rhymes, anything. Nothing quite matched. I'd play videos on my phone and listen, waiting for that familiar wrongness, that dragged timing, that underwater feeling. It never came. Tyler never said anything about moving, but he started spending more nights at other people's places. "Jess wants me to stay over," he'd say, casual, tossing a duffel bag over his shoulder. Or, "I might crash at my brother's tonight if we're out late." The nights he wasn't there, the house felt emptier, but in a way that made the other presence more obvious. Like when you take a picture off a wall and see the clean square behind it. I still go to work, I still pay bills, I still make coffee in the mornings and listen to the wood creak under my feet. I still walk past the window and catch a glimpse of the cemetery. I haven't been back inside it since the day I read those names. I don't need to. I know they're there. Sometimes, when I'm sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of envelopes, I'll hear steps in the hall. Not heavy, adult steps. Lighter ones, like bare feet. They always stop if I stand up. I keep telling myself there are explanations. Old houses make noises. Sound travels weird in this neighborhood. People reuse names all the time, especially in small towns. Flowers show up on graves because someone wants to do a good deed. Kids sneak into places and leave muddy prints. Radios turn on. Phones play music in pockets. Wind makes fences sing. I tell myself all of that over and over, especially at night when the house settles and the insects outside go quiet all at once. I've stopped trying to figure out who picked that little grave to adopt, or who still brings flowers there. I don't ask the lady at the Historical Society any more questions. I don't ask Tyler if he still hears the humming outside his door. And I don't ask why. Every time the singing starts now, it sounds like it knows my name. I stopped asking whose name that is. My name is Gavin, and I'm from Decorah, Iowa. I've moved around a little, but I ended up back here a couple years ago, when remote work became a thing for my job. I'm a data analyst for a small insurance company based out of Chicago. It sounds more impressive than it is. Mostly, I sit at my dining table with a laptop, a big mug of coffee, and spreadsheets full of other people's bad luck. My hours are pretty regular, 8 to 4 Central Time. I like that. I like knowing when the day starts and when it's supposed to end. I don't live alone. My cousin Tyler moved in last spring when he got hired at the hospital over in town. He works weird shifts, mostly evenings and nights, so sometimes we're like ships passing in the hallway. We grew up together, so it felt natural when he texted me, "Hey, your landlord's still renting that extra room?" He jokes a lot, fills in the quiet. I handle the bills and cooking most nights. He brings home stories and random junk food from the hospital vending machines. The place we rent is an old 2-story house on a small hill, right on a side street that dead ends at the woods. Across the narrow road, there's a cemetery. That's usually the part where people say, "Nope." But honestly, at first it didn't bother me at all. It's not some huge city graveyard, just a small pre-Civil War cemetery tucked into a rectangle of land across from us. There's an iron fence around it, painted black a long time ago, and now faded and rusting at the hinges. Up front, near the road, the grass is trimmed neat, and the stones line up in these kind of straight rows. But once you look farther back, past the big willow tree in the middle and the broken angel statue off to the right, things get more tangled. The grass is longer, ivy creeps up some of the stones, and a few of them have sunk down so far they look like crooked teeth. There are family plots with the same surname on 3 or 4 stones in a row. One of them is Harkness. That name shows up a lot. Some headstones are tall and thin, with dates from the 1840s and 1850s. Worn so smooth, you have to lean close to make them out. Others are little, with lambs carved on top. If you walk along the front section, you can see how someone tries to keep it tidy. Trimmed grass, a few artificial flowers in plastic vases. The gravel path swept clear. It's only when you look past the willow, into the back half, that it turns into something else. Not violent or anything, just wild. Decorah itself is pretty quiet. Small town, a couple stoplights, an old brick main street with a hardware store, a pharmacy, a diner that serves decent pancakes if you catch them on a good morning. There's a river not too far away, and a railroad line you can hear at night if the wind is right. People wave when they drive by, even if they don't know you. The kind of place where the grocery store cashier recognizes you after the second visit and asks how your week's going. From our front porch, the cemetery looks almost peaceful. In the early evening, when the light gets soft and the wind moves through the willow branches, it just feels like part of the neighborhood. Cars roll past, kids ride bikes on the sidewalk until it gets dark. A dog down the street barks at pretty much nothing. I'd sit on the porch some nights with my laptop or a drink and just watch the sunset hit the tops of the stones. That was just my view. It didn't feel creepy. It was just there. Tyler made the usual jokes when he first moved in. So if I see anybody in the yard after midnight, just assume they're supposed to be over there, right? Stuff like that. He said he liked it, actually. Nobody builds a strip mall across from a cemetery, he said once, crunching on chips at the kitchen counter. It's like built-in zoning protection. He slept fine. I slept fine. For the first couple months, it was just normal life, with old stones out the window instead of a parking lot. You start to notice little things when you see the same view every day. The first odd thing was the gate. The cemetery has a decorative iron gate right in the middle of the fence. It squeaks when the wind moves it, but there's a chain looped around it with a padlock. During the day, the city grounds crew comes by sometimes, unlocks it, goes in with a mower or trimmer, then locks it again when they leave. I'd seen them do that a few times. One Monday morning, I went out to get the mail and saw the gate standing open wide, chain hanging loose like someone had just dropped it. I figured they'd forgotten to lock it. People forget things. But the next day, it was closed and chained again. Then maybe a week later, same thing. Monday morning, gate wide open, no truck, no crew, no tire tracks on the gravel path inside. Just the gate yawning toward the road, moving a little in the wind. The chain and padlock lying right there, unhooked, like somebody had taken it off with both hands and carefully set it down. I remember standing at our mailbox with the cold air on my face, listening. You can hear gravel crunch when someone walks in there. I didn't hear anything, just the trees moving, a crow calling from one of the oaks, and a distant dog barking. The porch light over our door was still buzzing faintly from the night before. It flickers sometimes when it's about to burn out. I thought maybe some local kids were sneaking in at night. It didn't scare me. It just felt like something someone should fix. Another thing, flowers. I'd seen the usual plastic arrangements and every now and then some fresh flowers after Memorial Day. That's normal. What wasn't normal was the Harkness family plot. One afternoon, when I had a long lunch break, I walked over to drop a letter at the mailbox on the corner and cut close to the cemetery fence. I happened to glance in and saw a line of 4 stones with Harkness on them, and in front of the third one was a vase with white lilies. Real ones, fresh. You could tell because the petals were still tight. The thing that stuck in my head was the date on that stone. I stepped closer to read it through the fence. Died 1859. People still visit old graves, I know that. But the cemetery's kind of out of the way, and I'd never seen anyone in there except the grounds crew. No cars parked along the street, no one walking up with a bouquet. Nothing like that. I shrugged it off. Maybe someone had come when I wasn't looking. You can't watch a place 24/7. Tyler started noticing the motion light on the porch going on by itself at night. We put that light up because the old fixture had this constant flicker that drove me nuts. The new one points toward the road and part of the cemetery fence, just enough to see if anyone's there. Around midnight some nights, it would click on and shine over the fence. I'd be in bed and hear the faint click and hum through the wall. Sometimes I'd get up, peek through the front window, and see nothing but the empty street, the iron bars, and the willow branches moving in the breeze. Maybe a stray cat. That was my assumption. One night, I went out onto the porch in my socks when the light came on. The air was cold enough to sting my nose. I could hear insects in the grass, this steady hum, and then nothing. Just like somebody hit mute. It all went quiet in this sudden way that made me aware of my own breathing. I walked to the edge of the porch, the boards creaking under my feet, leaned on the rail, and just stared at the fence and the gate. The gravel path beyond it was empty. The willow branches swayed slow. Somewhere farther away, a train horn blew, low and drawn out, then faded. I stayed there a minute or two, waiting for an obvious explanation that never showed up. Eventually, the light clicked off, and the insects started up again. The first time I heard what I now think of as the breathing was late on a Thursday. Tyler was on a night shift. I'd stayed up too late watching some videos with my laptop on the couch. And when I finally turned everything off, the house got very quiet. The wood in the walls makes these tiny ticking noises when the temperature drops. And the old radiator knocks sometimes, even though we had a guy look at it. All of that didn't bother me. I know what houses sound like when they're settling. I went to the kitchen for a glass of water, and as I walked past the front window, I heard it. Not loud, not dramatic, just this slow, steady sound, like someone exhaling through their nose. It came from the direction of the front yard. I stopped, holding the empty glass, listening. The screen door made a soft tap in the frame from the wind, but underneath that was that sound. Inhale, exhale, like someone sitting just out of sight below the window, taking long, measured breaths. I told myself it was the wind moving through something, through that broken angel statue, or through the iron fence bars, or one of those half-buried drain pipes you don't notice until it rains hard. I stood there another minute, then forced myself to move, to get the water, to ignore it. When I came back with the glass, it was gone. The insects outside were buzzing again, faint but there, and the only breathing I could hear was my own. The thing about small disturbances is you can always explain them, one by one. The gate open. Teenagers, the flowers, some dedicated descendant, the motion light, cat, raccoon, branch, whatever. But they started to line up in my head in a way that made me pay more attention than I wanted to. The gate was almost always open on Monday mornings now. Not every single one, but enough that it felt like a pattern. I'd go out to get the mail or just step onto the porch with my coffee. And there it would be. The black iron gate swung wide toward the road. Chain and lock dropped neatly at the base. By lunchtime, I'd look again and it would be closed and fastened. I never caught anyone in the middle of it. The porch steps creak when you go down them. Gravel crunches when you walk near the fence. There was never any sound, just before and after. Tyler thought it was funny at first. "Maybe they're letting them get some air," he said one night as we sat on the couch. The TV was on low, casting that bluish light over the room. You know, like open pen time for souls. I told him he wasn't funny. He grinned anyway. Then it stopped being just my thing. One morning after a rainy night, he came back in from his car and said, "Did you go over there last night or something?" "Over where?" I asked. "To the fence. There's like spots in the grass across from our steps where something, I don't know. It looks like somebody was standing there for a long time and the rest of it's wet. But those are darker." He was tugging on his work badge, eyes unfocused like he was replaying it. "Forget it. I'm probably seeing patterns. That graveyard's in my head now." He laughed it off, but it didn't sound like his usual laugh. I asked him later that week if he had heard anything weird at night. He shrugged. "House makes noise, you know. I did wake up once because I thought I heard somebody breathing in the hall, but that could have been you." I told him it wasn't, but he was already putting his shoes on. I started looking things up about the cemetery. Just boredom at first. There's a county records site with burial lists for most of the older cemeteries. I found ours by the street name and pulled up a PDF. Harkness was on there a lot, like I'd seen on the stones. Next to a few of the names was a note, no dates, stone unreadable, stuff like that. One of the entries was for a J. Harkness, age unknown, location, rear section, east of Willow. No dates, just a note, separate plot. I tried to match that to what I saw out my window at night, the darker corner past the Broken Angel, where the ground dips a little. On a Saturday, I went into the little historical society office 2 blocks off Main Street. I said I was just curious about the cemetery near my house. The woman at the desk was friendly at first, asked which one, tapped on her keyboard. When I mentioned the Harkness name, something in her face changed. Not in a dramatic way. She just got tighter around the eyes, like she'd put a wall up. She printed out a thin stack of papers, slid them across, and said, "That should have what we have on file. Some of those old stones are, well, they're more symbolic than anything at this point." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Sometimes people put up stones for folks who weren't buried there," she said, rearranging a stack of brochures for a walking tour. "Or they moved remains. Or they never found them. Records weren't what they are now. Stories and stones, that's most of it." I asked her if anyone still took care of the Harkness plots. She paused for maybe half a second too long, then smiled. "Some families stay local," she said. "Others don't. You need anything else?" It was clear I wasn't supposed to keep pushing. After that, I noticed the flowers more. The lilies on that one Harkness stone wilted, disappeared, and then a few days later, there were fresh ones. Not lilies this time. Carnations. Sometimes just white, sometimes mixed with red. Always arranged neatly in that same metal vase, never scattered or knocked over by the wind. I never saw anyone put them there. I'd glance out while making coffee, or while washing dishes, or when I happened to pass the window on my way to the bathroom. The street would be empty, the wind moving the tree branches, a squirrel darting along the fence. But there the flowers would be, new again. At night, the breathing thing became harder to write off. It wasn't every night. I'd say once a week, then twice, with no set schedule. I'd be sitting in the living room or lying in bed with a book, and it would creep in under the other sounds, the fridge humming, a neighbor's truck door closing, a distant train, a slow, patient inhale and exhale from somewhere out front. It didn't sound like somebody struggling or snoring. It sounded like someone resting, close enough that if I sat up and really listened, I could almost feel my own lungs wanting to match it. One Tuesday around 11, Tyler came out of his room while I was watching some pointless show. He looked half asleep. "Do you hear that?" he said. His hair was sticking up on one side. I muted the TV. The house went quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Then, from outside, carried just enough through the glass, we both heard it. Inhale, pause, exhale, long and steady. Tyler rubbed his face. "Please tell me that's like a busted vent," he said, "or your weird neighbor doing yoga." "There's no vent out front," I said. My voice sounded too normal in my own ears. "It's gotta be the wind." "Wind doesn't breathe, man," he said, then shook his head like he was shaking a thought loose. "Forget it, I've got an early shift." He shuffled back down the hall. I left the TV on a while longer after that, just for the noise. It's one thing when something stays on its side of a fence, even if you don't like it. I told myself that. The cemetery is over there. We are over here. The fence, the road, the yard, those are all lines that held up until the footprints. We had a stretch of rainy days in October where the ground never fully dried. One afternoon, I came home from a quick run to the store. The sky was low and gray, and the air smelled like wet leaves. When I stepped inside, I heard the soft squeak of the screen door closing behind me, and then felt the familiar sag in the floorboard just inside the entry. I put the grocery bag on the little table and looked down. There were mud marks on the floor, but not in the way you'd expect if someone had just come in without wiping their shoes. 2 prints, roughly where a person would stand if they stepped in, stopped, and just stayed there, facing the street. They were darker around the edges, lighter in the middle, like the mud had sunk in. They weren't the tread pattern from my shoes or Tyler's. Our boots leave these pretty clear lines. These didn't have much pattern at all, just rounded shapes, heel and toe, not very deep. I touched one lightly with my fingertip. It was damp, but not wet enough to smear. More like the floor had absorbed it. I called out for Tyler, but the house answered with the usual creaks and the soft hiss of the radiator. He wasn't home. His schedule was on the fridge. He was still at the hospital for another 3 hours. I stood there for a while, feeling that weak spot in the wood under my feet and listening to the distant, irregular barking of a dog somewhere down the block. After a minute, I went and got a mop and cleaned the floor. I told myself it was leftover mud we hadn't noticed. That was easier than considering anything else. After that, the porch screen door started doing this thing where it wouldn't quite latch at night. Not always, just often enough that I noticed. I'd make sure it was shut before bed, hear it creak sometime around 2 in the morning, then find it sitting slightly ajar in the morning, pushing in and out a little with the wind. The hinges squealed in this soft, complaining way. You'd think it was just old and loose, but we'd had it adjusted when we moved in. The porch light clicked on sometimes when it did that, throwing a cone of white over the fence and part of the nearest stones. The air inside the house changed too, in certain spots. It's hard to explain without sounding dramatic, but the hallway that runs from the front door toward the bedrooms started feeling colder than the rest of the house. Not all the time, just in patches. You'd walk through and feel fine, then one step would be like going through a pocket of air that had been sitting in a freezer. I checked the windows. No drafts. We taped around the frames just in case. The radiator guy came back, bled the lines, said everything looked normal. Old houses do their own thing, he said, shrugging as he packed his tools. One night, I was in my room scrolling on my phone, trying to get my brain to wind down, when I heard Tyler call my name from the hallway. It sounded like he was standing just outside my door. "Gav?" "Yeah," I said, not looking up right away. Nothing. Just a little pop from the baseboard as the house shifted. "Tyler?" I put my phone down, went to the doorway, and looked out. The hallway was empty, the bathroom light off, the floorboards dark and still. I walked past his room and found it empty too. The bed was made, lights off, his work shoes gone. I checked the kitchen and saw his scribble on the notepad by the fridge. Picked up extra shift, back late. I stood there, listening to the fridge hum and the faint ticking of the clock, feeling that pocket of cold air seep into my arms. I went back to my room, closed the door all the way, and left the lamp on. The next morning, I mentioned it to him over coffee. "You didn't come home around midnight, did you?" He shook his head, yawning. "No, man, I was knee-deep in charting until 2. Why?" "I thought I heard you say my name in the hall." He rubbed his eyes. "You're letting that place across the street get to you," he said. Then softer. "I thought I heard you knock on my door the other night when I was trying to sleep. Twice. When I opened it, nobody was there. Didn't want to be dramatic, but..." He trailed off and smiled without much humor. "We probably just need more sleep." I kept telling myself it was the house, the wind, the way sound travels in old walls. That worked during the day. It worked at the grocery store, where the fluorescent lights buzzed and carts rattled, and the clerk with the short gray hair scanned my stuff and asked, "You're over on Maple, right? The old Harkness place?" I said, "Yeah." She paused, fingers hovering over the register keys. "You facing the cemetery?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, because why lie? She nodded like that settled something for her. "Folks don't usually stay long there," she said. Then she gave this quick little head shake, like she'd let something slip. "You want your receipt in the bag?" she asked, just like that, voice bright again. When I asked what she meant about people not staying, she just shrugged. "Rentals," she said. "People move, that's all." She didn't meet my eyes after that. Later that week, I was going through a folder of papers the landlord had left us. Old photocopies of deeds, tax assessments, stuff I'd never bothered to really read. The house had belonged to a Harkness family at some point, which wasn't a shock. That name is everywhere around here if you start looking. On one yellowed page was a note about a J. Harkness, ownership transferring posthumously to a cousin. The date was hard to read, the ink faded, but it looked like the late 1800s. What snagged my attention was the line under it. "Family plot maintained in Maple Street Cemetery, separate grave." It was nothing more than a line on a piece of paper that matched a line I'd seen in the burial records, but something about it made my chest feel tight. Separate grave. I thought of that back corner by the willow, where the ground dipped and the stones leaned. It occurred to me that I'd never actually seen that particular stone clearly, not from the house. Too much shadow. On a gray Sunday afternoon, I walked over. The wind moved through the branches, making a soft shushing sound. Gravel crunched under my shoes as I went up to the gate. It was shut and chained. I stood there, fingers resting on the cold iron, and looked in. Past the front rows, past the broken angel, past the willow. In the rear section, to the right, there was a stone a little apart from the others. Not way out on its own, just not quite in line. The grass around it was slightly darker, like it held on to more dampness than the rest. In front of it, there was that metal vase, and in it, as always, were fresh flowers. This time, they were daisies. I couldn't read the name from where I was. The wind shifted, and somewhere to my left, a chipmunk darted along the stone wall and chattered once before going silent. I told myself I didn't need to know. Whoever was buried there, if anyone was, had been dead a very long time. And flowers meant there was someone alive who cared enough to bring them. That's all. That night, though, when the breathing started again, it didn't sound like it was out at the fence. It sounded closer, more under my feet than outside the window. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening. The house was quiet except for a faint ticking in the walls and the occasional soft knock from the radiator. The breathing seemed to come from somewhere below the floor, slow and patient, like someone resting their head against the underside of the wood. I could feel my own breath wanting to sync up with it again. I turned on my side, pulled the covers up, and told myself it was pipes or air moving through some gap we hadn't found yet. I didn't get up to check. I just waited for it to stop, and eventually, it did. The next day, walking back from the mailbox, I caught our neighbor from 2 houses down, standing on his porch, smoking. We'd talked a couple times. I asked him, casually, how long he'd lived there. He said almost 20 years. I asked if he knew much about the cemetery. He looked past me, over my shoulder at it, then back at his cigarette. Longer than any of us, he said. Do people still get buried there? I asked. He shifted his weight, the porch boards creaking under him. Not like they used to, he said. Most folks go out to the new one by the highway now. That one there's mostly just names. He hesitated, then added, those graves aren't always what you think they are. He flicked ash into a little metal tray. Town's got a way of keeping its stories tidy. Doesn't mean they're true. Before I could ask what he meant, he said he had to get back inside and closed his door. Life kept going. I still sent emails, checked spreadsheets, paid bills, went to the store. Tyler still worked nights and came home with hospital gossip and cheap snacks. We watched dumb shows, argued about whose turn it was to take out the trash, complained about the weather. The cemetery stayed where it was, across the narrow road, behind its iron fence. Whatever was or wasn't happening there didn't stop the sun from coming up, but I started looking at the flowers on that one stone more often. They were never old. They'd wilt, disappear, and within a day or so, new ones would be there. Always neat, always placed straight. I never saw anyone cross the street with a bouquet. I never heard the gate. The motion light kept coming on at odd hours, shining straight into that corner. The porch light buzzed. Insects sang and fell silent and sang again. Every now and then, the breathing would start up under the regular noises of the house, like a background track you only notice when everything else gets quiet. I stopped trying to catch whoever was bringing the flowers. I stopped checking the county records site. I stopped asking the neighbor questions. None of it changed the view from my front window, or the way the air went cold in the hallway for a couple steps, or the feeling that the lines between here and there weren't as solid as I'd thought when we signed the lease. I still take the trash out at night sometimes. I still hear the gravel crunch under my shoes and the soft scrape of leaves across the pavement when the wind picks up. I still hear dogs barking down the street and the distant sound of a train horn cutting through the dark. I lock the front door out of habit. I check the screen door to make sure it's latched. I tell myself that the house sounds are just wood and pipes and old metal doing what they do. And every morning when I open the curtains and look across the street, the flowers on that grave are always fresh. My name is Logan, and I'm from Sleepy Hollow, New York. Most people only know the name from the old story, so when it comes up, they smile or make some joke about the headless horseman. I usually just let them. The real place is a lot quieter than people think. We've got the river, the train tracks, some old brick buildings that lean a little, a diner that smells like burnt coffee after noon, and a lot of older houses that creak when the wind comes off the water. It's not spooky most of the time. It's just home. I rent a narrow 2-story place on a short side street, the kind where you can hear your neighbor's screen door bang if they don't catch it in time. Across the street, directly in front of my living room window, there's a cemetery. Not the touristy section people take photos in, with the tours and all that. This is a smaller, older piece that sort of peels off the main grounds. Pocket-sized, I guess you'd say. Iron fence around it. A little decorative archway with the paint flaking off at the top. It's Victorian era, or so my cousin says. I never checked the dates that closely at first. I live with that cousin, by the way. Mark. He moved down for a job in White Plains and needed a place while he figured things out, so he ended up with me. House was a little tight for 2 grown men, but we made it work. We split the upstairs. He took the bigger bedroom because he drove the U-Haul, and I took the smaller one with the slanted ceiling and the radiator that clicks all night in the winter. We share the downstairs, small kitchen, small living room, and the front windows that look right over the road to the cemetery gate. I work from home as a data analyst for an insurance company. Nothing exciting, lots of spreadsheets, lots of calls where people say circle back and touch base and all that. My schedule is pretty regular. I start around 8, make coffee, check my email, stare out at the cemetery for a second while I wait for the laptop to wake up. It became kind of a habit. I'd look at the stones across the street, the low iron fence, the gravel path that cuts through the middle. It was neat near the front, trimmed grass around the first few rows, and then it got rough and tangled the deeper your eye went. The back half turned wild, with grass climbing over old stones and some kind of ivy working its way up a broken angel statue near the rear. At first, the cemetery just felt there. Background. The way the train horn is just there, and the church bells on Sundays. Kids cut through it in the afternoon sometimes, taking a shortcut to the little store down the hill. An older guy walked his dog along the edge most evenings. Sometimes I'd sit on the front steps after work, listening to the gravel crunch under his shoes and the dog's nails clicking as they passed the gate. The wind would move through the trees at the back, and the leaves would scrape along the pavement if it was dry. In summer, you'd hear chipmunks chattering in the low stone wall on the far side, and crows arguing in one of the maples near the center. Mark liked to joke about it more than I did. "You know you're the one who picked a place across from a cemetery," he'd say, flipping through channels while I answered emails on the couch. "If anything gets weird, I'm crashing somewhere with a parking lot view." "It's cheaper," I'd say. "The dead don't complain about noise." "They better not," he'd say. "Rent's high enough." It was a normal place, is what I'm trying to say. Quiet street, older house, radiator knocking in the walls at night, the smell of someone's laundry detergent drifting over if you had the windows open. You'd hear dogs bark down the block, or the screen door across the way creak and slap. Nothing dramatic. The first odd thing I really noticed was the gate. The cemetery has this simple iron gate that swings inward. It doesn't have a latch, just enough weight that it usually stays where you leave it. Every morning when I started work, I'd look up from my coffee and see it closed. That went on for months. Then, one Tuesday in early fall, I glanced up and saw it standing open. Just wide enough for a person to walk through. I didn't think much of it. Grounds crew, maybe. Or someone visiting a grave before work. The air was cold enough that my breath fogged the window a little, and I wiped a circle clear with my palm. No one there, but that didn't mean anything. People come and go. The next morning, it was closed again. 2 days later, it was open. This time, it stuck with me. I don't know why. Maybe just because my brain likes patterns. That's my whole job. I watched the gate for a few minutes, expecting to see someone step out from behind a stone or a maintenance truck pull into view. Nothing. The wind wasn't even strong. The trees barely stirred. "Something wrong?" Mark asked, coming down the stairs, still buttoning his shirt. "Gate's open again," I said. He peeked over my shoulder. "Maybe there's a night crew." "Yeah, maybe." He grinned. "Lantern guy." I frowned. "What? You grew up here and you don't know that?" he said. "Some bartender at Molly's told me. They've got a whole thing about some guy who walks the cemetery at night with a lantern. Local ghost story. Said you can see him through the fog if you're dumb enough to stare long enough." I rolled my eyes. "Yeah, they told you that because you were tipping in cash." "I'm just saying," he said, grabbing his keys. "If you start hearing chains rattling, I'm breaking the lease." That was it for a bit. Just the gate, open some mornings, closed others. Enough to notice, not enough to care. Then there were the flowers. I usually stretch my legs around lunch and walk a loop up the street and back. One day I decided to cut through the cemetery instead. It felt dumb not to, with it right there. The gravel crunched under my shoes, and the air had that smell of damp earth and old leaves. Some of the stones leaned, some had fallen. A lot of the older ones had their names worn so smooth you could barely read them. Near the back, almost against the fence, there's one grave that sits apart from the others, just a few feet off to the side of the row, like someone misjudged their line. That's where the broken angel is, the one I mentioned. The statue's wings are half missing, and the face is mostly gone. The stone itself is sunken down a bit, and the grass grown up around it. The first time I walked back there, I remember thinking it looked like nobody had visited it in years. So when I saw the flowers, it clicked. There was a small bunch of white flowers, cheap grocery store ones. Nothing fancy, lying at the base of that stone. Not in a vase, just laid down. The stems were still green and wet looking, like they hadn't been out of water long. The petals hadn't browned yet. They looked fresh. I checked the dates on the stone then, more out of curiosity than anything. The name was worn, but still there, if you narrowed your eyes and took your time. I won't repeat it here, but the person had died in the early 1900s, over 100 years ago. There were no other stones with the same surname nearby. No family plot, nothing like that. Just that one, a little apart, with the broken angel and fresh flowers. I figured maybe someone in town still knew the family, or some local history group did visits. There's always some preservation thing going on here. I walked back to the house, answered a few more emails, and forgot about it. A few days later, I went through again. It was cold enough that my ears hurt a little, and I could hear a distant train horn down along the river. I followed the gravel path, listening to it crunch under my shoes, and went back to that same grave. The flowers were still there. They still looked fresh. Not perfect, but not the way they should have looked after days of cold nights and frost. The petals weren't curled up or brown. The stems hadn't turned that flat, dull color. It was like someone had replaced them with the exact same cheap bouquet. I stood there for a minute, letting the silence sit. I noticed the way the insects had gone quiet. It happens when it's that cold. And the only sounds were the wind moving the bare branches and a dog barking far off. The air smelled like wet stone. "Okay," I said to nobody. "Somebody really likes you, I guess." I went back to work. I didn't start getting uneasy until the lights. We have a motion sensor light over the front steps. It's old and a little touchy. Squirrels will set it off. A strong breeze will set it off. Still, you get used to its rhythm. Most nights it flicks on when Mark comes home, or when the delivery guy drops something off late. Then it shuts off after a minute, and that's that. One night, around 11, I was on the couch answering a late email. Mark was at work. He'd picked up a double. The house was quiet, except for the radiator ticking and the occasional car going by. I'd pulled the curtains mostly closed, just a little gap in the middle because I hadn't bothered to fix them. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the porch light flick on. I didn't think much of it. I figured maybe a cat ran across the steps. I kept typing. The light stayed on longer than usual. Long enough that I noticed the room wasn't just brighter. It was, I don't know. It felt different. When I looked up, I could see a slice of the cemetery through that gap in the curtains. The light from our porch usually spills across the road and hits the iron bars of the fence, throwing those thin shadows. But this time, it looked like the light sort of stopped halfway. It was brightest near the house and then faded faster than it should have. The stones near the front looked darker, not lighter. That's not a thing, I know. Light doesn't do that. I told myself it was just the way my eyes were adjusting from the laptop screen. I got up, went to the door, and opened it. The screen door creaked the way it always did. Cold air slapped my face. The porch light buzzed above me. The concrete steps glowed a little. When I looked across the street, though, it felt like someone had turned the dimmer down on the cemetery. The road was lit. The fence was lit. But right past the bars, the dark looked thicker than it should have. I could barely make out the first row of stones. "Sensors going bad," I said, more to fill the air than anything. My breath drifted out in a little cloud. No one answered, obviously. Back inside, when I shut the door, the light snapped off too fast, like it had been waiting for me to move. The living room went dim again. The house settled, the wood in the walls making those small cracking noises, and I went back to my email. It happened again 2 nights later. That time, Mark was home. We were both on the couch, half watching some crime show with the sound low. When the porch light came on, it flashed across the TV, and the picture dimmed a little, like the brightness had dropped. I noticed it because the faces on screen looked washed out. "Did the TV just get darker?" I asked. "Power blip," he said. "This place is 100 years old, man." I looked at the gap in the curtains. The same thing. Light wasn't reaching the stones like it should. The angle of the beam was wrong. "You don't see that?" I asked. "What?" "The way the lights... stopping." He got up and looked, stood there a second. "Dude, your brain is fried. It's a light and some rocks." The next day at the grocery store, I brought up the flowers to the cashier. She's one of those clerks who's been there forever, knows everyone by name. "Hey, random question," I said while she scanned my stuff. "You know that small cemetery section off Maple? Across from the rentals," she said. "Yeah." "There's that grave in the back with the broken angel statue," I said. "Somebody's been leaving flowers. Just wondering if that's like a town thing. Historical society?" Her hands slowed a little on the conveyor. Not a lot. Just enough that I saw it. "People leave flowers," she said. "It happens." "On the really old ones, though?" She shrugged. "Some folks get attached to stories." I almost asked her whose grave it was, but she'd already moved on to the next customer in her head. I could see it. Her eyes slid past me to the line. I signed the receipt and didn't push it. I tried the cemetery office instead. There's a small building near the main entrance with their records. I stopped in on a Saturday just to satisfy my own curiosity. The woman there was nice enough. Gray hair, glasses, cardigan that smelled like some kind of floral soap. I told her where I lived, asked if the little section across from my street was officially part of their grounds or some older family plot, that sort of thing. She pulled out a big binder, flipped through maps. "That area's on our books," she said. "What are you looking for?" "Just history, really," I said. "There's this one grave further back, kind of set apart from the others. Broken angel statue on it. I was wondering about the family. Someone's been leaving flowers regularly." Her finger skimmed along a line, then stopped. She adjusted her glasses. "We've got incomplete records on some of those," she said. "Early 20th century. There was a fire at one point. A lot of names don't have much attached to them." "But there is a name," I said. "There's always a name," she said, and smiled like that was supposed to be a joke. "I wouldn't worry about it. Nice that someone's still visiting." "Do you know who?" Her smile flattened. "A lot of people walk through at night," she said. "It's an old town. Folks have their habits." That was it. She closed the binder like we were done. After that, I started noticing more small things, little bits that would have meant nothing on their own. The porch light coming on at odd times. The gate standing open when there was no sign of anyone around. Once, around 3 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of gravel crunching, slow and steady from outside. I lay there in the dark, listening. It wasn't the quick rhythm of someone jogging, or the stop and start of a dog walker. It was one step, then a pause. Another step, another pause. It passed in front of the house, kept going, and eventually stopped. No car doors, no voices. I told myself it was someone from the shift change at the hospital who'd parked down the street. That made sense. That's the thing. There was always a way to explain it if I worked at it. The whispering took more effort. I don't mean full voices. I'm not claiming that. It was more like the way the wind can move through leaves and make them sound almost like words if you're half asleep. It had happened late, when I was closing up downstairs. I'd turn off the TV, hear the radiator click, hear the fridge hum, and then in the space between those sounds, my brain would think it heard my name. Not sharply. Just a soft syllable that could have been Logan if you leaned into it. Once, I stopped at the bottom of the stairs and said, "What?" before I realized what I was doing. The house stayed quiet. The porch light flicked on, then off again. Mark caught his own piece of it a couple weeks later. I came in from a walk around dusk. The sky was that flat gray that doesn't really give you a sunset, just turns darker. I shook the cold off my jacket and kicked the door shut behind me. Mark was in the kitchen, standing very still, looking at the hallway. "You okay?" I asked. He jumped a little. Yeah, I'm fine." "You look like you saw a mouse." He laughed, but it was too fast. "Thought you were upstairs," he said. "I heard you say my name from the hall, like..." He dropped his voice and mocked me. "Hey, Mark, where's the good coffee? Then you came in the front door." "I just got home," I said. The screen door had slammed. There was no way he'd missed that. He rubbed his neck. "Place has bad acoustics, man. Sound bounces." We both left it there. Winter came down hard that year. Snow piled up along the road, and the iron fence across the street looked shorter with the drifts up against it. The cemetery shrank visually. Just the tops of stones showed in some spots, like teeth. The broken angel in the back was half buried most days. On mornings when the plows had gone through early, the road was clear, but the cemetery path wasn't. And still, sometimes the gate would stand open. The flowers kept appearing. Even when everything else was frozen and colorless, there would be that little bunch at the base of that stone, not covered by snow, not wilted. I told myself someone was brushing them off and replacing them, but I never saw anyone walk back there in the slush. One night, close to Christmas, the heat in the house was having trouble keeping up. The radiator made these loud knocking sounds, like someone tapping the pipes with a wrench. I put on a sweater and went downstairs to make tea. When I hit the bottom step, my socks squished. There was a trail of wet, muddy footprints in the hallway. Not full prints, more like smudges of dark, melted slush. They started at the front door, right in front of it, like someone had stepped inside and stood there dripping. Then they went down the hall toward the living room and faded out near the window that faces the cemetery. The door itself was locked. The deadbolt was still set. "Mark," I called out. He came out of his room upstairs, hair messed up, half asleep. "What?" "Did you go out and not wipe your shoes?" He blinked down at the hallway. "I've been asleep," he said. "Look at me." He was barefoot. I checked the door again. Locked, chain still on. I opened it and looked at the steps. They were dry. The porch was dry. The snow in the yard was undisturbed except for old tracks. No fresh marks on the concrete. "You must have spilled something," Mark said finally, "or it's from earlier." "In the shape of footprints?" I asked. He shrugged and went back upstairs. I mopped the water up. The smell that came off the mop bucket wasn't just dirty water or old floorboards. It smelled like the cemetery had on that first cold day. Wet stone, damp grass, the faint mineral smell you get when you stand near a grave that's been there a long time. I told myself I was imagining it. I started sleeping with my door slightly open after that, so I could hear if the front door moved. I never heard it. Still, every few days, I'd wake up with that feeling you get when someone has been in the room while you were asleep. No proof, just that small, tight knot in the chest. One Saturday, I finally went back to the cemetery official records. This time, I didn't ask the woman at the desk. I asked if they had any public documents I could copy, stuff about older sections. "Historical interest," I said. She pointed me to a stack of photocopied pages and pamphlets near the door. I took them home and spread them out on the kitchen table. Mark rolled his eyes when he walked by. "You're really leaning into this, huh?" he said. "It's something to do," I said. "Better than watching reruns." Most of it was boring, lot numbers, old family names, some notes about a flood that had damaged part of the grounds around 1913. One page listed unusual burials from that period. People without clear relatives, or who'd been moved from other sites. At the bottom, there was a short note, almost an afterthought, about a caretaker who died on the grounds during a storm. The name hit me enough that my stomach dropped. It wasn't identical to mine. The last name was different, but the first name matched. Same spelling, same short, plain little name sitting there in faded type. I know that's not rare. There are a lot of Logans in the world now. It still felt like someone had nudged me in the ribs. The note said he'd been found near a small, newer plot on the edge of the grounds. He'd carried a lantern like they did back then. There was some mention of him being devoted to his route or something like that. Nothing about a haunting, just a small life, summarized in 2 lines. I checked the date, early 1900s, same decade as the grave with the broken angel. I walked across the street again, papers still in my jacket pocket. The snow squeaked under my boots, that dry, cold sound. The gate was closed for once. I opened it, and the hinges gave this low groan. It was very quiet inside. No birds, no cars going by at that moment. My breath sounded too loud in my own ears. I walked the path, turned toward the back, and went to the grave. The flowers were there. Of course they were. White, clean, like they'd been placed that morning. No snow on them, no ice. A little ring of bare ground around the base of the stone, like the frost hadn't settled there. I wiped some snow off the top of the stone, ran my fingers over the name. Different last name than the record I'd read, but the same first name again. My first name. I told myself that was just how people named their kids back then. Names come in waves. But standing there, with the wind barely moving the bare branches and the whole world kind of held in place, it felt pointed. Behind me, I heard the faintest crunch of gravel. One step, I turned around. Nothing. Just the path and the long stretch of white. The iron fence, the road. The dim smudge of my house across from it, porch light off in the daytime. Still, it felt like the air had shifted. It was colder in a very specific way, starting at my back and creeping forward. My eyes watered from the wind, or maybe just from staring too long. "Okay," I said again, because it felt like I needed to say something. My voice sounded small. "Whoever you are, you're doing a thorough job." Nothing answered. That night, I left the living room curtains open wider than usual. I don't know why. Part of me wanted to prove something to myself. Part of me wanted to stop thinking about it. If there was some trick of the light, I wanted to see it clearly. Around midnight, Mark had already gone to bed. I sat on the couch with the TV on mute. Just light moving across the screen. Outside, the wind hissed softly, and every now and then I'd hear a car pass. Then the porch light came on. It didn't flare like a normal bulb. It sort of slid up from dim to bright, like someone was turning a dial very slowly. The brightness filled the steps, washed over the front part of the living room, and bled toward the street more. But again, it didn't go as far as it should have. This time, sitting still and watching, I could see it clearly. The light stopped in a soft, dull line right at the fence. The bars shone. Beyond them, the dark looked thicker. Not blacker exactly, just heavier. Like if you took one step through that gate, you'd feel it on your skin. As I watched, something moved in that dark. Not a shape, not a figure. More like an absence of light sliding sideways between the stones. Wherever it passed, the little bit of reflected glow disappeared for a second. It was like someone dragging a cup across a table and catching the reflection with it. Except there was nothing there. The area just went a shade darker and then lightened up after it passed. My phone was on the coffee table. I picked it up, turned on the camera, pointed it through the window. The picture it showed was almost completely black. No matter how I tapped the screen to adjust the brightness, all I got was grainy static and a faint reflection of my own face. The porch light was a white smear. The cemetery beyond was just noise. As I watched the screen, the audio meter at the bottom jumped like it was picking up sound. I didn't hear anything with my ears. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the fridge and the tick of the radiator. On the phone, though, there was this faint hiss, like static or wind. Right at the edge of it, there was a shape of a word. Not clear. Not something I would swear to in court. But it had the rhythm of my name. My thumb hovered over the stop button. For a second, I thought about stepping outside, walking to the edge of the steps, and trying to see whatever the phone couldn't pick up. That's what people always do in movies, right? They go out there. Instead, I locked the screen and put the phone face down. The light stayed on for a while, then eased back down to dark. Not a click, not a sudden off, just a slow dimming until the living room was lit. Only by the TV, somewhere in the walls, the heat kicked on. In the morning, when I checked the video, it was 90 seconds of black. The audio was mostly static. Right near the end, before I hit stop, there was a little spike. If you turned the volume all the way up, you could almost make out someone exhaling, like they were close to the microphone. Then nothing. I thought about deleting it. Instead, I left it there. Life went on. I still had reports due on Fridays, still had bills in the mailbox, still had to take the trash out. Nothing big ever happened. No flying objects, no slamming doors. Just those small things, over and over. The gate open on days when no footprints marked the snow. The mud on the floor even when no one had gone outside. The flowers that never seemed to age. The way the TV and lamps would dim at the same time the porch light flared. Sometimes I'd be working late and realize the insects outside had gone completely silent, even in months when they should have been loud. I'd look up and see the cemetery sitting there, quiet and still, and I'd feel like someone was standing halfway between my house and that broken angel, just waiting for me to notice. I still don't know what any of it means. Maybe it's just an old town with old wiring and a trick of the eyes. Maybe somebody out there likes to walk the stones at night with a flashlight and good timing. Maybe all I did was pay more attention than most people. I haven't moved. Mark talks about getting his own place, but he hasn't yet. We still split rent. We still joke about the cemetery sometimes, but not as often. There are some things we just don't bring up over dinner. I stopped asking questions at the office and the grocery store. Whatever people know, they've had plenty of time to decide not to say. The grave with the broken angel is still there in the back, a little apart from the others, and the flowers, well, the flowers on that grave are always fresh.